Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy. Back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What if Deku could nullify every quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Shota remembers the first time he'd found him. As with most strays, he found him in an alley. Like all alleys, it was dirty and forgotten and neglected. Abandoned. On that particular night, it was raining and cold. He'd been lucky that most petty criminals had decided they'd rather deal in their activities when it wasn't absolutely terrible outside. It just meant Shota had been crouching out on rooftops for undeniably long stretches of time in a cold, miserable ball for most of his patrol. If he hadn't though, he would have passed the kid, lying face up in that alley without noticing. Jumping down, he carefully approached the kid, squatting beside the boy as one lone red eye looked up into the rain clouds. Like a spider lily. He was covered in bandages, worn and sodden. One even covered his other eye, the other side of his face. On his chubby cheek, a few freckles were smattered. His black hair was a mess, drenched and mixing in with the trash on the floor. His skinny arms and legs were spread out around him, as if he were making a snow angel out of the muck of the alley, his clothes drenched. A little late to be out, kid. Shota watched that glazed, dull red eye shift, but slide back up to watching the heavens. Melancholy surrounded the boy, like a thick blanket. Shota could feel it as the kid barely twitched. I guess. Looking closer, the kid had looked young. At least 6 years old. A few of the bandaged areas seemed darker as he took in every detail, places he'd learn later revealed burns. For the time, Shota had huffed. You can't lay out here in the rain, kid. Why not? There was a dullness to the kid's voice. It made Shota frown. I'm cursed anyway. A disease. You're not a disease. He carefully held out his hand, palm up. Come on. I'll take you somewhere to clean up and get warm. A red eye peered up at his hand, curious yet empty. People who touch me lose their quirks. It's better to stay away. I'm cursed. Shota felt his brow slightly raise. I can do that too. Stop quirks. The red eye locked onto him, a small light buried in it. Activating his quirk, he saw the boy's eye widen as he reached out and pressed his fingers onto his larger palm. They were small, thin and cold. After a long moment, the boy's eye fell back to neutral and his hands settled in Shota's. Deeming his demonstration sufficient, he turned off his quirk with a blink, letting his wet hair drop back down as he blinked rapidly. As it dropped, he saw a small blue circle unfurl from their hands, and his eyes widened as it expanded. Blue lights filled the alley, a spectacle of quirk activation, and a light breeze ruffled their hair and clothes. It lasted for only a brief moment, before the boy yanked his hand back, scrambling away from him. I'm not human. I'm no longer human. I'm cursed. I'm cursed, I'm cursed, I'm cursed. Kneeling on his knees, Shota suspended his internal disbelief, focusing on what was more important. The kid. Inside, his mind was racing as the presence behind his eyes came back. Is that what his quirk felt like to people? Did this kid have a similar quirk to him? After the kid had withdrawn from him, he'd felt the presence return, as if the switch was tripped. A touch-based eraser. If Shota was right, then the kid possibly had one of the rarest quirks in the world, one of the most powerful. So long as he touched someone, he could turn off their quirk. A stronger eraser. Kid, calm down. He winced at the bluntness, but at least he'd gotten the boy's attention before he went further down that spiral. It was a spiral he'd been in himself once or twice growing up. The difference was his generation still had a fair few without quirks. The newer generations weren't like that, he knew, if the statistics were representational to the population. By now, 95% of people under 50 had a quirk. People relied on their quirks for individuality and validation. He could imagine the cruelty the kid had been through from the few experiences he'd had himself. A few had labeled him a villain, just because his quirk allowed him to stop another's quirk. He'd even had his fair few of scornful comments, bullies and hateful prejudice from quirkists, all of a similar vein. With the kid's red eye trained on him, he activated his quirk once more, letting it drop after a few seconds as the kid sagged back onto the bricks, relieved. Digging his hand into his belt, he pulled out his eye drops and tilted his head back. Rain fell on his face, not that he cared as he blinked in the saline over his dry eyes, then put the bottle back in his pouch. Dry eyes. His quirk, Aizawa, lasts until, the boy muttered, surprising Shota the first time he'd heard the kid's analytical skills. At the time, Shota had moved closer to the kid and held out his hand, like before. A red eye studied his hand for a moment, a dim light in them as he'd asked softly, "Come on, kid. Let's get out of the rain." A small, hesitant hand slid into his. Opening the door to his apartment, Shota didn't even question himself on why he'd come home of all places instead of doing the right, the legal thing and taking the kid down to the station. For all he knew, the kid could be missing. Instead, he led the boy inside the apartment, slipping off his shoes and stepping into the main area. Music was playing from the kitchen, something upbeat but unobtrusive. On the way over, he'd introduced himself and learnt the boy's name. Izuku. No last name. The kid had kept his head down, shuffling beside Shota the whole way. Hizashi was pottering around in the kitchen, the warm lights showing off their small abode as Shota led the young kid over to their living area. "We have 2 cats, Shota stated, eyeing the kid as he shifted from foot to foot. Yowler and Coffee Bean. Yowler, true to her name, meowed loudly in greeting and hopped up onto the back of their couch, green eyes looking at the boy as her sleek cream tail swayed behind her. "But Yowler." Shota pointed his thumb at the vocal cat, who bumped her head against the boy's hand to encourage him to pat. He complied, a small ghost of a smile on his blank face as he ran his bandaged palm gently over her head and back. "Coffee Bean'll be in the kitchen. He's a treat fiend," Shota explained, lifting off his capture weapon and hanging it up beside the door. "Shota? That you?" He heard from the kitchen and saw the kid's eyes fall onto the pictures hung up on the walls. Smart kid, he thought as he affirmed it was him to his husband. He tossed his keys beside Hizashi's vibrant ones in the key bowl, moving over to the kitchen to check on his husband. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll find you something to change into, and some towels." The kid nodded, focusing on Yowler as she purred loudly and butted his hand again to slide her. Stepping into the doorway of the kitchen, he saw his husband turn and smile at him. His blonde hair was down, prescription glasses on his nose and old pajamas covering him. Around his feet, the fat patchwork tabby, Coffee Bean begged for treats as the feline tried squeezing in between Hizashi's long legs. Needless to say, it was a fruitless task. "Welcome back." His husband greeted him, his ruby-red eyes lighting up as he looked at him. They soon crinkled as Hizashi scrunched his nose, adding, "Though I love you, you need to shower. I can smell you from here." "Thanks," he dryly replied, before his slight smirk dropped back into its usual frown. "I brought a guest back with me. Hope you don't mind." Hizashi perked up, a grin coming to his face. "A guest? What are they like?" His husband didn't wait, wiping his hands off on a tea towel as he tucked a long strand of flaxen hair behind his ear and tried to spy the kid through the doorway. "It's a kid," Shota said lowly, seeing his husband's brows raise slightly but stay silent. He was lying in an alley, covered in bandages. He continued, seeing Hizashi's face pinch as he took a quick glance to the kid. He seemed content for now, his hand rubbing Yowler's belly as she purred and drooled in pleasure. "He has a quirk." He met those red eyes framed by glass lenses. "He can stop a person's quirk by touch." Hizashi's lips parted in surprise, before schooling itself. "I'll get a bowl ready for the little listener. He's perfectly fine to stay a couple days as well, if he wants to. There's some fresh clothes and towels in the cupboard." Shota sent his husband a look of thanks, holding back from squeezing his hand as he remembers the gunk covering him and the kid. Stepping back into the living area, he calls out to the kid and gestures him to follow as he leads the way to the bathroom. On the way, he snags some old clothes and a towel. Leading the kid in, he shows him how the shower works, in case he wants one, before leaving the clothes on the toilet seat and closing the door behind him. His own shower is quick, using the ensuite in their bedroom. He towel dries his hair, before tossing it up into a loose bun, old sweatpants and a gray shirt covering him as he steps out of the bathroom. As he does, he sends a glance to the closed bathroom door before moving back into the living room to wait. It doesn't take too long to see the kid emerge, but when he does, Shota seeks in a silent breath as he sees the burns on the kid's skinny arms. Even with the clothes swamping him, his forearms are bare to the world, and very obviously red. The kid keeps his head down, his damp black hair fluffy and curly without the grime and water weighing it down. Masking his shock, he moves over and grabs the first aid kit, wordlessly squatting before the boy and asking if he could treat the burns. It's silent for a moment, before the kid nods and allows him to treat him. He tries to be gentle, only touching when needed, to keep the boy comfortable. As he applies salve and bandages to the kid's arms, he catalogs the damage and the positions. As a hero, they're taught to look at injuries, to determine the reasons behind them. Defensive, self-inflicted, fatal, minor, accidental. Looking at the kid, the burns were mostly first degree, though some appeared to be second degree, the closer it got to his hands. Almost like he had to touch them to make it stop. He made a mental note to call Recovery Girl for advice on treating burns. He doubted her quirk would be able to heal the kid, considering his quirk nullified quirks by touch. He could always try shutting off the boy's quirk while Recovery Girl used hers on the kid. It was something to think about for tomorrow, when he could contact Shizenji. Tying off the ends, he packs up the first aid kit and stows it back on the shelf, just as his husband walks in with bowls of food ready. He sets the bowls on the table, shooting a grin to the kid as he cheerily greets him, as if the bandages weren't a big deal. He'll learn later that Hizashi had watched him treat the kid's burns from the kitchen, and that the reason they had to use the nice chopsticks was because Hizashi had snapped a pair of the cheap ones they normally used. "Hey little listener, I'm Yamada Hizashi. I made some food if you'd like some." A spark lit up in the kid's red eyes as he zeroed in on his husband, before his eyes widened. "You're present, Mike." His husband choked, before the kid turned to him. "You're married to present Mike." He slightly smirked, quirked his lips as he nodded to the kid, catching on quickly that the kid was smart. It was a good trait to have, in whatever he wanted to do when he was older. "I am." They lead him to the table, sitting down with him as they all ate. After the first initial moments, Hizashi easily gets the boy talking. Mostly about Hizashi's hero work and quirk, but it gets the boy to talk between the long explanations from Hizashi, which is the important thing. The chatter is nice, Shota thinks, as he keeps quiet and eats, content to listen. By the time they're finished, the kid's eyes are drooping, and his head is teetering between up and bowed. The Gyudon had filled their stomachs, along with the miso soup, the beef slices delicious over the rice. They'd find out that the kid had eaten bland foods, made to keep him alive than to be tasty. Hizashi smiled at the kid, before asking the kid if he wanted to sleep in their spare room. As Hizashi led the kid away, and got him settled in, Shota had pulled out his phone, firing off a text to Tsukachi. Simple and to the point, he simply asked the detective for a favor to investigate a possible case. Knowing Tsukachi well, he wasn't surprised to receive a text almost immediately, telling him he'd stop by in the morning if it was convenient. Both of them had terrible schedules, rarely sleeping and running on coffee most of the time. Confirming it was fine, internally mourning the sleep he would miss, he propped himself in the doorway of the guest room, watching Hizashi tuck the kid in as he promised to leave the light on. "If you need anything, don't be afraid to ask." The kid nodded before he was out like a light. He watched his husband stand and join him, a worried look in his red eyes as they carefully left the door open a crack and moved into their own room. They brushed their teeth, then got settled in together, their alarms set and costumes ready in the dresser. "What is it, Zashi?" His husband's mustache turned down with his lips, his brows furrowing in concern. "I asked if he had any parents we could call to tell them where he was, in case they were worrying about him not coming home. Mostly, I wanted a number for when we needed to track them down." It was only brief, but the little listener looked terrified at the thought of calling someone. I was expecting an outburst of denial or tears show, but he just went so blank. "I texted Tsukachi." Shota assured the blonde, placing his hand over Hizashi's and squeezing. "We'll make sure the kid is safe." "I know, Sho," his husband squeezed back, I saw those burns. They should hurt a lot, and yet the kid only seemed mildly uncomfortable with them. It was, how many times has he had burns for that he can do that? Staying silent, Shota sighs and intertwines their fingers. We can't change the past, Zashi. We just have to make the future better. The furry belly of Coffee Bean is the thing that wakes him up at some unholy hour of the morning. He grumbles at the fat tabby always looking for food and deposits the heavy cat on the ground. Before he can flop back onto his pillow and sleep, he hears shuffling in the lounge. Almost immediately, he remembers the boy from the alley, the kid he'd brought home. His bones pop in a way that should be slightly concerning, considering he's only in his early 20s as he gets up to investigate, using his trained stealth to move through the hallways to the main apartment space. As he gets there, he sees the kid, nursing a glass of water as he huddles on the couch. He dragged the comforter with him, Yowler curling up with her new favorite human it seemed, the sleek Arabian Mao purring loudly. Making some noise so as not to startle the kid, he moves over to the coffee machine and gets it started, fixing his hair back into a bun as he looks over at the kid. Anything you'd like for breakfast, kid? The kid's red eyes watch him for a moment, before he utters, I don't mind. Shota nods, accepting that answer for now as he starts reheating the miso soup and getting the rice cooker on. Usually he'd slurp a jelly pouch and go, but figured the kid needed proper food. Coffee Bean lumbers in, already stationed at his bowl as Shota bends down and cleans it, outing fresh cat food in it for the greedy feline. Like a man starved, Coffee Bean attacks the bowl like his life depends on it. It's gone in moments, and Shota can't help but grumble, you better not chuck that up in some dark corner, you glutton. By the time he's plating up the dishes, Hizashi is up and about, changed and ready for the day. Coffee Bean had sauntered into the lounge, settling in his spot under the coffee table, throwing a curious glance to the kid as he got settled. As he puts everyone's breakfast down on the dining table, he gets a quick peck on the cheek from his husband as he sits down. Hizashi, ever the social half of their marriage, gets the kid to talk about quirks again. It seemed to be the only thing that got him talking, Shota observed, as he finished off his food and nursed his coffee. He needed the bitter, black beverage to function, especially this early in the morning. Before long, Hizashi was making his way to work, his hand reaching over to ruffle the boy's hair before the boy's step back stopped him. Instead, Hizashi turned the aborted action into finger guns, wishing the kid a good day as he gave one last kiss to Shota. When the door closed, he turned to the kid, who shifted from foot to foot again. Come on, kid. He nodded his head to the side as he picked up the folded clothes they'd washed and dried. Let's get changed and then talk. It doesn't take long for either of them to change and return to the living area. By now, Coffee Bean had plodded off somewhere else, probably to relish in his most recent meal before he gets hungry again and begs for treats. Now clean, Shota finds the formal-looking wear strange on the young boy. He'd changed his bandages, sending that message to Shizenji after he'd done it before sending the kid off to change. His coat and shirt are tailored to stop at the crook of his arm, showing off the bandages over his hands and forearms. His shoes were still muddy and beside his own boots at the door, but the rest of his attire were now clean. His slacks were black, with a matching waistcoat over his button-up and black tie. Normally, kids ran around in hero-themed shirts and shorts, with bright, obnoxious trainers as they played heroes and villains. Not this oddly formal outfit. Unless it was for a wedding. But then it would have been more formal, with a suit jacket and light colors. Tensei's younger brother had been dressed up for their wedding, but not like the kid. If he were honest, it screamed shady, like an old film noir mobster. Setting down a green tea before the kid, he made himself another abyss-colored coffee as he sat opposite the boy. His coat was folded neatly beside him, Yowler settled on top, his socked feet hovering over the wood flooring as he blew on the cup between his wrapped hands. Letting a content silence continue for a moment, he swallowed a mouthful of scalding coffee then set it on the coaster. All right, kid, he started, meeting the dim red eyes observing him. To start, I should explain who I am. The kid's head tilted, before Shota leant forward on his elbows, hands settling under his chin. I'm an underground hero. Name's Eraserhead. Recognition flickers in the boy's eyes. causing Shota to remember that this boy is smart. Most children weren't like this. They were smart, sure, but not observational. This kid, he'd seen him pick apart the room as he entered, reading Yowler's collar for information as he'd heard him quietly step around the room for a minute, then settle back in the exact same spot he'd been in to give Yowler attention. If Shota were anyone else, he wouldn't have picked up on it. However, he was a man who prided himself on his situational awareness. I called a friend of mine over. He's a detective. We would like to discuss with you a few things to do with your home life and your injuries. He watched the kid take a sip of the green tea, eyes staring at his flat black ones as the boy's freckled face remained blank. You can choose not to answer some questions if you'd rather not, but it would be best to answer them now to save you needing to answer more questions later. That's okay, Aizawa-san. The kid replied politely, placing his green tea into his lap. One hand scratches Yowler under her chin. I'll answer all of your questions to the best of my ability. It isn't long until there's a knock on the door, and Shota gets up to answer it. When he does, Tsukachi gives him a small smile, eyes equally as tired as his own as they exchange pleasantries. Shota isn't one for many pleasantries, so it's as pleasant as he can scrounge up. Tsukachi knows him well enough to know his lacking social skills, so it isn't a real surprise that they move on to introductions. Shota sits on one side of the couch, as Tsukachi takes up the other side, greeting the kid with a smile as he holds out his hand over the coffee table. Hi other holds the rim of his hat. I'm Detective Tsukachi Naomasa. The boy eyes the hand, not reaching out to touch. Nice to meet you, Detective-san. I'm Izuku. Not missing a beat, Tsukachi pulls his hand back and takes out his recorder from his inner BRST pocket, setting the metal device between them. And you as well, Izuku-kun. Before we start this interview, I must inform you that my Quirk, lie detector, will be active throughout our discussion. It allows me to tell whether what you are saying is the truth or a lie. It's a passive quirk, so unless I take suppressants, it is always active. Do you have any questions before we start, Izuku-kun? That light comes back to the boy's red eyes, as he curiously inquires about Tsukachi's quirk. How can you tell what is a lie and what is the truth? Is that through color association, a certain taste, a feeling? Does your quirk distinguish between half-truths? If so, which part can you determine is the truth? What if the individual believes something is true when it truly isn't? Such as, say, believing the sky is red when it is clearly blue. Tsukachi blinks in surprise, something which makes Shota smile faintly smirk as he sees Tsukachi recover from the onslaught of questions. I would have to say that it's more of a sixth sense, myself. I haven't truly thought deeply over it, I'm afraid. As for half-truths, I can usually feel something off in a statement. As for opposing perspectives of truth, I haven't come across an instance to date where someone's belief has opposed universal fact. Before the boy could ask more questions, Tsukachi wisely interrupted. Now Izuku-kun, do you have any questions concerning the interview? The kid shakes his head. All right then. Pressing the button, Tsukachi leans back into the couch, notepad open as he smoothly states. For the record, present at this interview are Detective Tsukachi Naomasa, Pro Hero Eraserhead and Izuku, no last name given. The time is 9:23 a.m. and the date is the November 21st 21XX. Now, Izuku-kun. I'll start off with some easy questions. How old are you? 6 years old. I'll be 7 in July. True. Naomasa writes it down in his notepad, while Shota observes. The boy looks perfectly at ease, except his dull red eyes. Behind the dullness, he can see a fear in them. As if she could sense it, Yowler butted her head under the kid's limp hand, encouraging more pats. What day is today? Tuesday. True. Tsukachi scribbles something else in his notepad, not that Shota can see as the kid takes a sip of his third cup of green tea. Considering that it was either coffee, green tea or water as drinking options. Coffee was off the table for the 6-year-old, so that left him with a hot drink or cold drink. All right, Izuku-kun. What is your last name? After placing his green tea back in his lap, the 6-year-old answered with the poise of someone many years his senior. Akatani, legally. Tsukachi paused. True. My father is Akatani Hisashi, otherwise known as the Dragon. True. The Dragon, a Yakuza executive of the Hofukukai. He had a strong fire quirk and was known to be a powerful villain. Due to the scales covering some of his face, it is speculated that he had a dragon mutation that linked to his fire-breathing quirk. Shota remembered the case easily, considering the recent attacks that the Hofukukai were claiming to be responsible for. Was your father the one who burned you? Shota asked, his half-lidded eyes falling onto the small boy. His red eyes remain on Tsukachi as he utters simply, yes. True. Tsukachi sent a look to him that he ignored, his ever-present poker face still in place as he resumed listening. Do you live with your father, Izuku-kun? I do now. I used to live with my mother. Before Tsukachi asks, the boy answers. Her name was Midoriya Izuku. He killed her last year. All true. I used to have green hair and eyes like my mother. Then I looked too much like her, so Hisashi had a quirk change it to this. He was even more upset when I didn't get pyrokinesis. All true. Could you explain the last part? My mother had a quirk that I called attraction of small objects. It allowed her to pull small objects towards her. Mine are one-way telekinesis. I always thought it was more like gravity man manipulation, changing an object's gravity to her hand. It was clear that the kid loved quirks, something that shone through in his explanation. As he paused to drink his green tea, he seemed to get back on track. Hisashi thought, by having a child with my mother, he would get a child with a quirk to manipulate fire. Instead, he got a cursed child. Whoever I touch, their quirk goes away. Shota closes his eyes for a moment as he gulps another mouthful of coffee. Quirks were the kid's passion, it was clear to see. Having a quirk that nullified other quirks, he could see how that could warp into a curse for the kid. He was glad Hisashi wasn't here for this, he thought, as he opened his eyes to watch the kid. For a 6-year-old, he had already been through too much. It was a miracle the kid wasn't broken yet, didn't hate the world yet, wasn't a villain yet, to get back at his own father. Wisely, Tsukachi chooses to move the interview along. Would you like the color changes reversed? No. The green reminds me of my mother too. True. The police think my father has a dragon mutation, don't they? Izuku-kun? He doesn't. His quirk is fire-breathing. He sticks on scales to cover his freckles and to throw the authorities off on a search for dragon mutations in the registry. True. Their base is in Mizudafu, on the southwest side. It's underground, mostly, but they have a building they own above ground. It's a company called Alcotech. It's a front to sell and buy illegally. They have a few connections in the police as well. True. Shota scrutinizes the kid as he lifts his cup to his lips and notices the shaking. He's scared, but he's telling us anyway. Shota stands up and crouches in front of the kid, lightly covering the kid's hands with his own. With the bandages, he can tell that he still has his quirk, not that that matters as he gets the kid to meet his eyes. What you're doing is brave, kid. Unexpected, but brave. It's okay to be scared. You don't need to be strong all the time. You can take a break whenever you need. The eyes water, but the kid wipes his tears with a bandaged arm. I'm okay, AI Eraser-san. I want to keep going. Yowler yowls, shifting to flop next to the kid's slack-clad leg, her purring sounding like an engine. Privately, Shota theorized the feline had some minor voice quirk that amplified her voice. Evaluating the kid for a moment, he carefully pulls his hands away and moves back into his seat, trusting the kid's words for now. Tsukachi takes a sip of his coffee before the interview resumes. Do you know how many are in the Yakuza group, Izuku-kun? Not specifically, but I know there is at least 50. That I know of. Here I have a list. From the pocket of his coat, he reveals a Ziploc bag, which has a finely folded piece of paper in it. Shaped like a lotus, he passes the origami flower over to Tsukachi, who carefully unfolds the flower and reads off some of the information. Shota catches his eyes widen before he refolds the lotus and pulls out an evidence bag. Gingerly dropping it in there, he stows it out of sight as he thanks the boy. True. I think that is all the information we will need on the Hofukukai, Izuku-kun. Thank you. The kid's shoulders droop, his poise dropping as he peers into his green tea. But Shota knows the detective isn't done. I just need to ask a few more questions if that's all right? Okay, Detective-san. What were you doing out in the rain last night? Red eyes continue looking into the green tea as he pauses, before his lips move. I ran away from the compound. How did you run away? I dumped ketamine in the guard's coffee. The doctor explained about it once, while he was treating me. I just remembered where he stored it, broke the lock and grabbed some. After the guard was asleep, I took his wallet, snuck out through the entrance and took a train as far as I could pay for. True. Why were you lying in an alley? Shota asked, watching the kid faintly smile. He'd come back to think about the boy's resourcefulness. I wanted to feel the rain. It was nice. True. How long were you there for before I found you? I'm not sure. I think it was after dinner though. I ate before running away. True. Tsukachi shut his notepad and slipped it back into his coat. All right, Izuku-kun. That will conclude our interview for now. If we need any more information, we will contact you regarding seeking another interview. Saying this, I believe the information provided today is sufficient to allow us to investigate Alcotech, corruption in the police force, Akatani Hisashi and the ongoing Hafuku-kai case. Thank you for your time, Izuku-kun. He reaches forward as the kid politely replies in kind to Tsukachi, who stops the recording device and stores that away in one of his trench coat's pockets. Not before writing something on the recording with his pen. So, what will happen to me now? The kid asks as Tsukachi finishes off his coffee. The kid's wrapped fingers clutch his cup tightly, the only sign of his nervousness. The other worries in Yowler's fur, rubbing her exposed belly as she stretches out. Shota himself already knows what he will be doing regarding protecting the kid. As the detective sends him a look, Shota sets his empty coffee cup on the coaster, crossing his arms. In Article 24 of the OCC, it states that the purpose of this provision is to protect witnesses in criminal cases from potential retaliation or intimidation. These measures can include physical protection such as relocation and allowing witnesses to testify in a manner that ensures the safety of the witnesses. The provision. Shota decides to interrupt the kid's worrying mind. Witness protection kid. Tsukachi nods as the kid stares at him, his red eyes wide and shocked. It would ensure your safety, while we work to capture and trial the Hafuku-kai and your father. Tsukachi stands and bows to the kid, who seems stuck on the idea of witness protection. Please accept my thanks in providing concrete evidence against the Hafuku-kai, Izuku-kun. I hate to admit this, but we have been having trouble pinning evidence on any of the members of the Yakuza group. With your knowledge, we have something we can use to get our foot in the door. Thank you, Izuku-kun. You're a hero. Aye. Okay, Detective-san. The kid seems to buffer for a moment, and Shota hides a smile smirk as he stretches his stiff arms over his head. I'll send the paperwork over to you later, Detective. Tsukachi smiles at him, a knowing twinkle in his eye as he puts on his hat. I'll start the process when they're sent over. For security, the only police officer who will be able to know where Izuku-kun is and who he's with will be me. For now, I'll start looking into Izuku-kun's list as a head start. Leading Tsukachi out, they exchange goodbyes briefly, before Shota is just left with the shell-shocked kid. Shrugging on a coat, he looks over at the kid for a moment, before calling out to him. Hey kid, want to come shopping with me? You need more clothes. Red eyes stare at him for a moment, in slight disbelief, before the kid lands on his feet, and puts his empty cup in the sink. Aizawa-san, won't I be leaving to go into witness protection? Leaving? Shota slides his eyes to watch the kid's expression as he hides his smirk behind his capture scarf. Witness protection started last night, kid. He doesn't laugh when the kid trips over from the shock. An indisputable fact about Shota is that he hates large crowds. He hates the noise, the people, having strangers so close to him that all they needed was to a knife stuck out to stab him. It'd be hard to find the culprit, with so many people around him. It's why he enjoyed his work as an underground hero. Not only was he more effective as an unknown, but he didn't have to interact with the populace like his husband did. Then again, Hisashi was a DJ. He enjoyed speaking with people, learning about them. Speaking of, he should have consulted the blonde before agreeing to house and protect the kid. His husband would have agreed in a heartbeat, of course, but it was only right to give him a say before going ahead with it. Slouched in his seat, he hides his face into his capture scarf as he waits on the bench for the kid to change. He whips out his phone and sends a quick message to his husband. Knowing his husband, it'll be a short while for him to reply. He reads over Shizenji's message, fires one back with a time and confirmation, before the sound of the curtain being pulled back lifts his focus away from his screen. How is it, Aizawa-san? White socks cover his feet, camel teddy trousers covering his legs and a matching hoodie covering his top half. A pair of bunny ears droop from his hood, his bandaged hands stuffed into the pouch at the front. They were a set of lounge where the kid had taken a shine to, so much so that without a word, Shota swiped a few different sizes for the kid to try on, adding it to the pile they had accumulated over their visit to the shop. Luckily, seeing as it was a Tuesday morning, not many people were out and about shopping. Blissfully, it made it quiet and emptier than he'd envisioned halfway through the car ride there. "Looks good, kid," he stated before holding out the last outfit they'd picked out. "Why don't you try these on?" Gingerly, the kid took the folded pile and pulled the curtain closed again. Like most kids, the boy had taken to some of the hero merch, but surprisingly hadn't jumped for it like he'd been expecting. In general, kids nowadays were obsessed with heroes, especially the number one, All Might. The kid had browsed the store, even picking some stuff up, but in the end he'd mostly gotten Present Mike merch and a few other heroes. He'd been more excited about the notebooks Shota had picked up, if he was being honest. Not that he minded too much. If the boy was staying with them for a while, at least he wouldn't have to compete with toys for some couch space. As the curtain was opened again, Shota nodded to the kid in approval and swayed his head to the left for the kid to join him, pushing the cart forward. The kid had on a pair of gray sweats, with a dark blue shirt on. A pair of trainers covered his feet, and a fur-collared coat was thrown over everything. At the checkout, the store assistant had been a chatty type, something that Shota wasn't. Even with his short answers, it seemed the preppy young woman wasn't deterred. She sliced off the tags from the clothes the boy was wearing, using her sharp nails as she went back to scanning their items. With one display of her Quirk, metal nails, she had managed to grip the kid's attention, at least. It was a relief for him, as he let the kid dazzle the lady with his questions while he silently took their bags and took out his wallet. If he noticed the extroverted assistant sink into her seat in shock after a bombardment of questions from the kid, he didn't take pleasure from it. Aizawa-san looked down at the kid, who had his bandaged hand tightly gripped on Shota's jacket trim. "Why did you get me so many clothes?" He blinked carefully. Normally, it was Hizashi who went overboard in the shopping department. He didn't think he'd gotten too many clothes for the kid, seeing as it could be years before the Hofukukai were rounded up and jailed. It was only logical to get the boy his clothes now than to have to come back here again. Besides, all Shota could think about was the well-tailored suit the boy had worn before. He couldn't just wash and wear them or borrow his and Hizashi's old clothes the whole time. He could afford it on his average income. It wasn't like he spent his money like this often, only really using it to buy his life's supply of jelly pouches and coffee, along with feeding Coffee Bean's food addiction. He should really put that cat on a diet, he thought briefly before his eyes slid back to the big red ones staring up at him. "You could be with us for a while, kid." Shota weaved them through the shopping center with ease. Usually he'd be in and out, but the kid's short legs kept him from walking at his usual pace. The rest of their ride to the apartment is mostly silent, though Shota does feel the occasional glance fall onto him from the boy. They have Put Your Hands Up radio on in the background, Hizashi's exuberance filling the background noise as he drives. Usually, the car stays in the parking lot, since neither of them really need to use it. Really, Shota thinks they should get rid of it. It's a comfortable silence, one Shota doesn't mind as he holds the door open for the kid, shuffling in with the bags. "Come on, kid, let's get this into your room." Curiously, he sees the kid stare at him, as if in confusion, before he stutters into action, picking up some of the lighter bags Shota had left in his wake. Yowler was quick to join them, following the kid as Coffee Bean emerged from his and Hizashi's room. He drops the bags on the neatly made bed, hiding his inspection of the room as the kid dumps the bags as well. Want me to help, or do you want to do this on your own? I can do it, Aizawa-san. Thank you for the clothes and other items. His fluffy black head dips into a formal bow, one that Shota waves off. No need for that, kid. Stepping out of the boy's room, he pauses at the threshold, hand on the door handle. If you need something, come get me. The kid bobs his head, so Shota leaves him to it. Dropping over the sofa arm, he pulls out his phone and unlocks it. His half-lidded eyes catch the few messages he'd received and clicks on them to see his husband had agreed to house the kid, already planning a celebratory meal for the occasion. Coffee Bean plunks himself before him and meows his demanding meow, one that Shota knows to be a call for food. Forcing himself from the couch, he found the right paperwork, signing off what he needed to before sending it off to Tsukachi. Looking at Coffee Bean, he sighs, but gives a small treat to appease the cat for now. Coffee Bean scoffs it down in a second, eyes demanding more. He just reseals the packet and puts it in the cat box. A quick glance to the time, he flops back onto the couch and closes his eyes, figuring that it'd be a good time for a nap. A creak makes his eyes slide half open, falling onto the kid caught short. He shifts from foot to foot, a nervous habit he was finding, so Shota suppressed a sigh and sat up. What is it, kid? I need something to stick a few posters up, please. Moving to the kitchen, Shota passes a sulking Coffee Bean and rifles in the knick-knack drawer, finally finding the double-sided tape they had. With it in hand, he passed it over to the boy, following him into the kid's room to help get the posters up straight. With a few personal touches, the space already felt much more lived in than Shota remembered. Apart from the occasional friend crashing in the bed for the night, the place was mostly collecting dust. A few soft toys were assembled on the end of the bed, with the dresser filled neatly with the kids' new clothes. Yowler had settled in the middle of the kids' soft toys, curled up and purring like a sleeping dragon guarding their hoard from old folktales. Hung up on the back of the door, Shota spied the kids' coats, and the old shoe rack Hizashi had forced them to keep, being used so stow away the kids' few games and hard toys. Shota joined the kid, who stood up on the bed to reach where he wanted the poster to be. He recognized it as the Wild Pussycats, all the members posed in their well-known introductory poses. Holding the poster up, he instructed the kid to tape the corners, watching the kid rip the tape up with his teeth. As instructed, the kid reached up and stuck it on the back of the poster, pressing it on for good measure before picking off the film covering the other side of the tape. Carefully, the kid flattened the poster onto the wall, where it stayed fixed. The process reminded him of his own time as a kid, not that he dwelled on it for long as he helped stick up the kid's other poster. This one was of the number 1, All Might, with his beaming smile and the words of his alma mater's motto styled under the hero. Luckily, it was a small poster, just over the old desk Hizashi had brought from home when they moved in together. The kids' notebooks were neatly lined up on one side of the old wooden desk, with a few of his and Hizashi's old books and desk lamp on the surface. Once done, Shota looked over at the kid, who was just folding up some of the last few clothes that had still been in the bag. Take a break, kid. Let's have a quick lunch. Or a late lunch, if his glance to the stove clock was right. That meant it wouldn't be long until Shizenji arrived to treat the kid of his burns. The kid sat in his seat at the table, watching Shota as he prepared some sandwiches for them. He'd remind himself to buy groceries tomorrow or see if Hizashi could get some on his way home. Knowing his husband, he probably would be anyway. Finishing his sandwich, he picked up the boy's empty plate and washed them quickly, running his hands under the water to rid of the soap suds. Seeing the kid remain seated in his chair, Shota turned to him as he dried his hands. Are you going to say what's on your mind, kid? His head turned to face Shota. There was a hesitance in his expression, conflict in his dim red eyes as his bandaged hands twisted in his lap. Aren't you afraid that I could stop your quirk forever? Shota leant back on the door. No, he voiced honestly before crouching beside the kid's chair. Not because I don't think you can, but because I believe that you won't. There was a small spark in those large red eyes as Shota kept eye contact. He needed the kid to understand, to remember his words. Quirks do not define who we are. They are merely a tool we can use to our advantage. Like tools, we learn to master them as we grow up. No one has perfect control of their quirk without training or guidance, kid. You just have to work hard to control it. But how do I do that? The boy, Izuku replied, a slightly desperate edge to his voice as his face slightly pinched. It's a curse. Closing his eyes for a moment, Shota activated his quirk. His bun fell out as his hair lifted, the boy watching his display with veiled interest. He held his hand up to poke the kid in the forehead, the kid's eyes widening at the contact. After a few seconds, he pulled his finger back and closed his eyes, before meeting the kids once more. What did I just do? You used your quirk on me. Shota hummed. And what does it do? Stops quirks. The kid draws his brows together, confusion in his voice as Shota nods. It only works on quirks. So is my quirk a curse, kid? No. The kid denies strongly, eyes wide in disbelief. It's really cool. Perfect for getting the drop on people. It makes fights essentially quirkless, which is really effective against criminals because almost everyone uses their quirks to help fight against her. It looked like the kid was catching on, Shota thought with a hint of smugness in his smirk as he caught the kid trail off. Reaching up, he slowly pats the kid's head, surprising himself and the kid. He figured it had to do with owning and patting the cats too often that it felt so natural to do. A blue light expanded and stretched from their contact, and Shota didn't remove his hand from the kid's head even as he jerked in an aborted escape. It was an important moment, and he needed to prove a point. He needed the kid to start accepting his quirk, before he fell into a deeper hole than he was in now. So was that a quirk or a curse? A quirk. Shota hums again, before pulling his hand back. It was a start, he thought, knowing the kid had a long way to go. After a few moments, he feels the presence of his quirk come back. An old teacher of mine is coming over to see about treating those burns. Shota notices the kid perk up, no doubt thinking on the possible quirks they could have had. I'll leave you to finish sorting your room, kid. If you need something, come get me. Standing up, he moves back into the lounge, not smiling as he hears the kid quietly utter, "Thank you." If he does, then no one needs to know. A knock on the door prompts Shota to rise from the couch and crack his bones in a stretch while padding over to the door. When he opens it, he isn't surprised to see Shizenji there. Dressed in civilian clothes, a shawl and dress, Shota still feels like he did back in UA when she'd heal him after hero training, as she assesses him. It's a nostalgic feeling, one that brings up memories of mastering his capture weapon, of meeting Hizashi and Tensei and Nimuri, of how he earned his place on the hero course, how he trained, he tried not to think about that. You need to sleep more, dear. Sleeping is the body's natural way to heal, after all. Now, lead me to the patient. He grunts out a polite greeting to Recovery Girl, who he lets pass through the doorway, her walking stick tapping on the wood. Thank you for agreeing to come. She waves him off as she walks into their small living area, placing her bag on the coffee table as he goes to fetch the kid. He doesn't get far, before the boy pokes himself out of the hallway, and his dim red eyes land on the veteran hero. He's still dressed in the same clothes he'd changed into at the clothing store, with one of his new notebooks with him. One is what is written on the front, something that Shota puts into the back of his mind for later. When the kid recognizes the hero, a spark lights up. Your Recovery Girl. Shizenji takes in the kid's appearance, her beady eyes giving nothing away as she throws Shota a glance. It was the same glance Hizashi had given him, and he figured he would be answering questions later for it. I'm surprised the newer generations remember me, dearie. The kid quietly joins him and Shizenji, the notebook in his one hand and a pencil in the other. Shota already knows the kid'll be asking questions about her quirk, heal. So, he's not really surprised when the kid hops onto the couch and flips it open, pencil already scribbling characters down before pausing to look at the youthful heroine. Your quirk has to do with healing a person's body after injury. How does it work, Recovery Girl-san? Shizenji takes it in stride as she nears the boy with gloves on. Assembled on the coffee table are a few medical supplies, but also a camera to record the injuries. He knows a few of the supplies himself, being taught in first aid and having been injured multiple times in his line of work. No need to call me that, you can call me Dr. Shizenji. And I will show you in a moment my quirk, dear. I just need to ask you a few questions and examine your injuries. The kid nods to Shizenji, who asks the kid simple questions, writing it down in her folder. His full name? Akitani Izuku, his date of birth, July 15th, his blood type, B, etc., then his recent injuries. Just burns on my arms from my father, Dr. Shizenji. Shizenji merely writes it down, as Shota had briefly informed her of how he'd gotten the burns over text. Okay dear, I'll just take a thorough look at your burns. Now hold your left arm out for me. The kid complies after his eyes had caught Shizenji's gloved hands, something Shota noticed but neglected from voicing. Settling his notebook beside him, Shizenji works off the bandages on the kid's fingers, working up the arm to just above the elbow. She scrutinizes the burns, turning the boy's arm left and right to fully see the damage, before lifting her camera. I'll need to take some pictures of these injuries to document them, dearie. Will that be all right? Okay, Dr. Shizenji. In times like these, Shota has to remind himself that the kid is just 6 years old. He acted older than his years, but he was still a kid. Picking the camera up, Shizenji instructed the kid to position his arms, before asking, "How long ago did you receive these burns, dear?" "A couple days ago." The doctor at the compound wrapped them afterwards. The heroine then tells the kid to hold up his arms like a robot. Shizenji takes more photos of the injuries, pausing to write down some notes in a folder. "Did the doctor give you any tablets to relieve the pain?" "He gave me some ibuprofen." Shizenji places the camera down, writing information down in her folder, and Shota prepares himself. He had already explained to Shizenji the nature of the kid's quirk, so all that was left was to try a theory out and see if it works. "All right, dearie. My quirk is heal. It allows me to speed up the body's natural healing process to heal injuries. To do this, I simply need to kiss it better." "Kiss it?" "Dr. Shizenji, my Q quirk stops quirks if I touch them." Shota steps in then. "That's why I'm here, kid. We want to try something." The kid looks at him, his big red eyes on his flat black ones, his head slightly tilted in curiosity. "I'm going to cancel your quirk, so that Shizenji can use hers to try healing your burns." Red eyes widen in realization, and Shota sees Shizenji give the signal to go. Activating his quirk, he stares down the kid, his periphery catching Shizenji's lips extending to kiss the boy's cheek. A green glow emits from the red, burnt skin, one that Shota puts into the back of his mind as he keeps his eyes open. The boy looks down in wonder as the burns turn lighter, then pink, and finally pale as the skin repairs itself back to new. In the places of second-degree burns, though, there is some light scar tissue. As the green glow fades, Shota closes his eyes, keeping them closed for a moment, before half opening them. "Here, have some gummies, dearie. It'll help recover some of your stamina. It's not a replacement for a warm meal and a good rest, but it'll do in the meantime." Shizenji places a few gummies in the kid's hands, the boy noticeably tired as his head droops and a yawn escapes his mouth. The youthful heroine then rewraps the kid's other arm, her small expert hands securing the bandages efficiently as she ties it off at the top. Shizenji then turns to Shota, pulling out a prescription book from her bag and writing something down. "I'm prescribing Izuku some scar cream to smooth over the scar tissue. I'll visit again next week to heal his left arm, since he doesn't have enough stamina for both, but in the meantime, make sure he has plenty of rest. Replace his bandages once in the morning and try to keep the bandages dry and intact. If they get wet, then remove the bandages, gently pat the arm dry with a clean towel, then apply cream and rebandage. If he gets any symptoms, like dizziness, weakness, clammy skin, a high temperature, or you see an infection coming from the burns, call me." Shota agrees, taking the offered prescription sheet and thanks Shizenji as he leads her out of the house. She slightly admonishes him again for his lack of sleep, telling him to get more of it, before she states, "You know, if I didn't know different, I would say the boy was your son. He's not." But Shota can't deny the similarities. The black hair, red eyes, the erasing quirks. If he ever did have a child, he would imagine them to be like the kid. Maybe that's why he wants to help the kid so much, he muses. Hisashi and him had discussed kids in their relationship and had even looked to adoption at one point. Shota was reluctant to take on a kid though. Not because he didn't want one, but because of the potential of dying in their line of work. Something they knew all too well. It turned out that they hadn't found any child that felt right with them. So, they'd stopped looking. Hisashi had been upset for months after, not that Shota was any different. Before he says his goodbyes to Shizenji, he sees her concern as she casts a look behind him. Those burns are serious burns, Shota. He may not look in pain, but he certainly should be. I'd give him some over-the-counter pain relief as well, to ease the pain he's in. At least I was able to heal the worse-off arm, which I believe is the one he must have used to reach in and stop the father's quirk. With the doctor gone, he's left with a sleepy kid nodding off while munching gummies. Shaking the kid's shoulder for a moment, he sees him blink and stare unfocused at him. Come on. You have to eat properly or else you'll choke. Audibly, he hears the kid swallow all the chewed gummies at once, before the kid slumps over onto Shota. With a sigh, he picks up the kid carefully, moving back into Izuku's room to tuck him into the bed. It takes a few moments, but eventually, Shota has the kid tucked in the bed and the curtains closed. He leaves the desk lamp on, and the door open ajar before going back to drop off the kid's notebook. Setting it on the boy's desk, he pauses to gaze at the sleeping kid, taking in the kid's room. With a mixture of emotions. He had to remember that Izuku was here for witness protection. He wasn't their son, even if it felt like it. He has to be prepared for when the kid wants to leave and live a normal, happy life. He'd help all he can to ensure the kid lives happily, and if the kid wants to stay, he'd happily accept him. Flopping onto the couch, he settles down for a long nap. He'd give the kid some paracetamol when the boy wakes up, but for now, he'd let Izuku rest. I'm home. Shota knows it's Hisashi as he wakes up. Opening his eyes, he watches from the couch as Hisashi comes in, dropping a kiss to his cheek before moving to dump his shopping bags on the kitchen counters. Coffee Bean makes himself known, as does Yowler, as their cats congregate in the kitchen for food. Getting up, Shota stretches himself out of the case in his back, moving over to the kitchen to grab a jelly pouch. His husband, still dressed in his hero costume, sends him a look. No jelly pouches before dinner show. Shota slumps, not that he'd admit to it. As Hisashi finishes unpacking the bags, Shota moves over to begin putting them away, changing the subject to ask how his husband's day went in his own way. Hisashi grinned, telling him exuberantly how it went, even with Shota's occasional deadpan comment. He feels the kid stare, and simply turns, holding out a packet of noodles, asking, "Hey kid, could you put this in the cupboard for me?" Izuku steps over the threshold, into the kitchen, gingerly grabbing the packet and going to the pointed cupboard. The kid is practically staring a hole into his husband's hero costume, eyes resting on the directional speaker around his neck with an assessing gaze. Shota remembers it from the lingering gaze the kid had this morning, and the kid's questions about his husband's quirk. Hisashi is quick to greet him with a smile, red eyes hidden behind his orange glasses, soon asking excitedly, "I heard Shota took you shopping today. How'd it go, little listener? Get anything you like?" "Aizawa-san got me clothes and some other things. I like my notebooks a lot." Hisashi easily asked him questions, getting the kid talking. "A notebook, huh?" Shota was partially jealous of how his husband effortlessly spoke with the kid, never missing a beat to talk. "What about hero merch?" "Oh, did you get any of mine?" The kid grabbed some vegetables and put them in the crisper, Shota passing him some freezer foods as he moved to place his new supply of jelly pouches up in the rightmost cupboard. Their kitchen area was pretty small, given that their apartment was a two-bedroom. They'd had it for a couple years now, but Shota had a feeling that they'd need to get a bigger place soon with Izuku living with them. "I did, Yamada-san. Aizawa-san bought me some Hage headphones." "Oh, now we me." Shota glared at him, though it did nothing except save their eardrums from a quirk-active cheer. What makes him smirk is the sparkle in the kid's eyes from the action, something he files away in his mind. Of course, his husband completely ignores him, flashing a smile as he shuffles past him with a carton of juice in hand. Moving around, they finish unpacking everything, and Hisashi goes to change out of his hero costume. Shota feeds the felines, swiping a jelly pouch for his patrol as the kid watches him. Then, the kid's eyes scan the left-out ingredients Hisashi had organized in a pile on the counter, a thoughtful look in his eyes as he spots the chicken thighs on the stovetop. It isn't long until Hisashi returns, now dressed in some lounge clothes and his hair down. "Are you making carriage?" His husband's cherry-red eyes blow wide behind his glasses. "I am, little listener." The blonde then perks up in a way Shota's familiar with, knowing his husband had just gotten an idea. "Want to help me make it?" Izuku's dim red eyes briefly widened, then fell back to normal before he nodded. His husband clapped in his joy. "Great. Then let's get started," coming from his lips as Shota was booted out the kitchen to give the pair room in their small kitchen. It gives him time to prepare for his patrol tonight, so he easily steps out of the small space and moves into their bedroom. Part of him thought about taking some days off to let the kid get accustomed to living with them, but the other part, the louder one, wanted to start on the dragon case as soon as possible. Luckily, it seemed the kid got along with Hisashi just fine, if the chatter he could hear from the kitchen was any indication. Regardless, he'd let the kid choose whether or not he was fine to be alone with his husband. He had enough holiday accumulated to take a couple days off, after all. Silently stepping through the house, Shota stops at the opposite side of the living area as he sees Hisashi and Izuku in the kitchen. The kid has his hand covered in potato starch and flour, the bandaged one still clean. There was a bit on both Izuku's and his husband's clothes as the boy stands on a chair beside his husband. Music is being played, while Hisashi mans the stove, grinning at the kid as he says something. Hisashi says something back, a twinkle in his eyes as the kid agrees. Coffee Bean meows from the dining chair he'd settled on, with Yowler grooming herself on the edge of the couch, with full view into the kitchen. Giving the feline a small scratch under the jaw, he settles on watching them a little as the red-eyed pair work on the carriage. Honestly, Shota shouldn't be surprised that his husband would pick to make deep-fried chicken as a celebratory dinner. What he was surprised on was the fact the kid knew how his husband was planning to make it from just the ingredients. He'd leave it for now and let the kid tell them at his own pace. It wasn't vital information, not to catching and locking up the Hofukukai, anyway. It didn't mean Shota wasn't curious. Red eyes find his and he pushes himself off the couch he was leaning on, moving forward as the kid hops off the chair. He silently pats the kid's head in thanks, moving the chair back under the table, while he gathered the plates and chopsticks. Hisashi hums and fishes out the crumbs with a sieve, then submerges a few floured chicken thighs in the oil. Some pop rock song is being played, the guitar and bass beat making his husband sway in time as he twirled the sieve in his hand. Izuku reaches over the sink, just able to on his tiptoes, while Hisashi asks Shota if they still have the small cooling racks in the cupboard. They aren't hard to find, so he finds them easily and puts them beside their plates. They were a GG gift from Nomuri to Hisashi one Christmas a few years ago, something his husband had kept but rarely used, since it was mostly just the two of them at home. He can see a few other dishes already laid out. A few side dishes, vegetables, and he could see the rice cooker was nearing the end of its timer. After the last thighs are cooked, they all sit down to eat. It's a comfortably quiet dinner, one where the kid's face looks distant, as if he's thinking of something far back in his young mind. Shota doesn't mind the quiet, which is interrupted by the occasional comment on the food or to pass over the spicy mayonnaise as they chow down. By the time Shota puts his chopsticks down, he's full and ready to go for his patrol. Before he does, he grabs some paracetamol and a glass of water, then he calls out to the sleepy 6-year-old and crouches beside him, like he had that afternoon. Hisashi was on dishwasher duty and had left the two in relative privacy in their small apartment. Izuku blinks at him slowly, tired but more awake than yesterday as Shota speaks to him. "I have a patrol soon, but I have some paracetamol to help with the pain. Will you be alright with Hisashi here while I'm gone? You can say no and I'll stay." The kid is silent for a moment, feet slightly swinging in an approximation of his usual fidgeting habit. After a moment, the kid blinks and looks at him in the eye, then takes the tablet from him and swallows it down with some of the water. For a moment, he watches him down a few more sips from the glass, then places it back on the table. "I'll be fine with Yamada-san. You're a hero, Aizawa-san, and that means you save people." He looks down after, and Shota stays quiet while the kid bites his lip. Shota can tell the kid wants to say more but stopped himself. He'd tell him when he's ready, Shota thinks, as he pats the kid's knee, waiting for the kid to meet his black eyes. If you're sure, kid. If you need something, don't be afraid to ask Hizashi, as long as it isn't to do with insects. The quip gets the kid's lips to slightly lift at the corners. If you need me, you can call me. The number's on Hizashi's phone. Okay, Aizawa-san. Patting the kid's knee again, he stands and leaves the kid to move away from the dining table. He watches him disappear behind the corner, then turns to give a kiss and goodbye to his husband, also to tell him to give the kid another dose of paracetamol in 4 hours. On his way out, he grabs his house keys and dips his head in just to check on the kid again. Izuku is sat on the couch, his If1 notebook open as he scribbles away in it. I'm off now, kid. His announcement gains the kid's attention with a snap, before he nods to Shota, a small, okay Aizawa-san. Shota swears he hears a quiet, stay safe from the boy, but doesn't say anything on the matter lest he had imagined it. As the door closes behind him, he ducks his head down and moves through the hallway, mentally preparing himself for his shift as he assures himself the kid would be fine without him. If he wasn't, the kid was smart and resourceful enough on his own and could call him if needed. He doubted Hizashi would let anything happen to the boy, not if he could help it, anyway. With those reassurances in mind, he stepped into the elevator and pressed the ground floor button, the prescription slip tucked safely into his utility belt to pick up later. By the time Shota is unlocking the door to the apartment, he's ready to commit himself to his bed and sleep. Most of his week had been spent planning the raid of Alcotech and the Hafukukai. Since the moles and the police force were still being investigated and found, only Tsukachi and a handful of other heroes were present. Sir Night-Eye had led most of the meeting, having known more about the Yakuza's dealings and movements than most. As All Might's sidekick, he had seemed buried in investigations and information gathering from the underground. Shota had mostly been there to reiterate Izuku's information, having spoken with Tsukachi to agree on keeping the fact that a 6-year-old's suffering and escape were the reasons that they'd had a breakthrough in the case. Not only would they question the credibility of the information, but he also knew that they would drag the kid further into the investigation. The kid had been through enough as it was. Shota wanted to keep him as far away from the Hafukukai as he could, not put him on a pedestal like a sitting duck to be hurt by them again. The Yakuza group was famed for its retaliation, hence the name they went by. They would break a traitor's jaw by making them eat the curb, then skewer them through the chest. They'd then burn their fingerprints off and toss them into a river to be found by the police. The thought of a child. Shota closed his eyes. Sir Night-Eye hadn't been pleased but had let it go when they'd used the fact their whistleblower was in witness protection. It was a good thing the law ensured anonymity to individuals in the program. But it also made Shota think on the kid. When they caught his father and the rest of the Yakuza group, Shota knew the dragon's real name would be revealed. Not only did Izuku look identical to his father, but they also shared the same family name. Anyone who Izuku became acquainted with would piece together their connection quickly, and Shota knew what society was like to those related to villains, especially when considering the perception of quirks and them being inherently heroic or villainous to the general populace. They were just making some progress on the kid's perception of his own quirk. If others started impressing their narrow-minded views on the boy, Shota knew it'd set Izuku back to a darker place than before. Not only that, from what Tsukachi had dug up, the kid had never had his quirk registered. That meant that he had to arrange an appointment with a licensed quirk doctor to authenticate and register the kid's quirk. On the one hand, it meant that there was no record of an Akatani aside from the boy's father in the system, meaning one less hurdle to jump in hiding Izuku's identity away. On the other hand, it meant that the boy would have to register his quirk, as it was a mandatory requirement across the world. Once done, there was almost no way to separate the two's connection. After all, it wasn't like Izuku could fake his quirk, especially as it was a rare and powerful quirk. As he opened the door, he felt his mind calm for a moment as he took in the sight. On the couch, Izuku had curled up beside Hizashi, both sound asleep as Yowler lay over the back of the couch. A few blankets were covering the pair, and the TV's blue glare shone down on them. There were a few snacks on the table, along with the kid's H1 notebook and All Might pen. It was a gaudy pen, With All Might's face on the clicking tip of it, the two tufts of hair stuck out either side and his smile big and white on the front. Coffee Bean was laid out by Hisashi's feet, his large patchwork form easy to see as Shota silently removed his capture scarf and shoes. His keys dropped into the key bowl as he quietly moved past the pair to change and shower. Not before dropping his coffee refill onto the kitchen counter, where he read the post-it note Hisashi had written to tell him he'd given Izuku another dose of paracetamol and changed his bandages. By Monday, the kid would be bandage-free. As he pads over to slurp another jelly pouch before crashing for the night, he sees Izuku shift under the blankets and his eyes blink blearily open. His hands reach up and rub at his sleepy red eyes, before they meet flat black ones. "You're back," a kitten-like yawn escapes him, making Shota's name come out as Zawa-san rather than Aizawa-san. It wasn't cute. Dipping his head in acknowledgement, he watches the kid carefully extricate himself from the couch and join him in the kitchen. As he does, Hisashi moves over to curl his arm around a couch pillow, then settle back into his light snoring. The kid makes sure to grab his H1 notebook and the loud yellow, red, and blue pen. As Shota quietly opens the cupboard and snags a jelly pouch, the kid opens his notebook, scribbling in it for a few moments before his feet start shifting. A yawn escapes his mouth every few moments, and Shota knows that he should be putting the kid to bed, but he prompts him anyway. He could push back the exhaustion a little more, he was used to it. "What do you want to know, kid?" Dim red eyes seem to flare for a moment, as the kid carefully words himself. "Aizawa-san, may I ask you some things about your quirk? I really like it, and also, I think, maybe, it could help me with my Q quirk." He thinks for a moment, weighing his words. Mostly, he was surprised it had taken the kid so long to ask him, but he had mostly been working and asleep while the kid had been with them. Mostly, the kid would ask him some questions as he sat to watch and analyze hero fights. Occasionally, Shota would explain some things to the kid, who would write it down in his notebook and ask about how they fought. Shoyuta was surprised the kid would question their quirks or actions, though he shouldn't be after hearing him pick apart quirks and strategize. It was refreshing to listen to a young mind question heroes, rather than be in awe of them, even if Shota suspected that the reasons for these questions came from bad circumstances. Regardless, if the kid decided to be a hero in the future, analysis would be a powerful tool he could use in outsmarting his opponent. Even if the kid chose another occupation, his analysis skills would still benefit him in the long run. Finally, he decides on letting the kid ask a few questions, as he picks up the scar cream and gestures the kid over to the dining table. "You can ask a few while I put this cream on the scars. After that, it's time to sleep." The kid nods, hopping into his seat and waiting for Shota to near while he rattles off a few questions. "Does your quirk work if you look in a mirror? What's the range of your quirk? How many people can you affect at once? Have you thought about a controlled mist to spray your eyes to make you stare longer? Why does your hair float? Do you have another quirk, like levitation?" Uncapping the cream, Shota starts applying it onto the kid's hand, not minding his quirk switching off as he works the cream between the kid's small fingers and over the palm and back of the hand. The kid's questions do get him thinking. "I haven't tried looking in a mirror. The range hasn't been tested, but it would be as far as I can see a target. Unsure on that one." "No." He moves up from the wrist and up the forearm, massaging the cream in before capping the lid and picking the pot back up. Most of the scarring looked like it was there to stay, though the scar cream had brought most of it down to a faint pink that would fade into white with time. The kid yawns again, his bandaged hand rising to muffle it as Shota washes off the cream on his hands and puts the pot in the medicine cupboard. Looking at the time, he takes out another dose of paracetamol for the kid, handing it over with a glass of water as he leads the kid to bed and tucks him in. Steps away, he puts on the desk lamp. "Zoa-san," Izuku yawns, droopy eyes on him as he pauses and grunts to show he's listening. But the kid is already out, sleeping peacefully. Sighing, he ruffles the kid's hair and leaves the door ajar. He grabs a pillow and puts it under Hisashi's head, bringing up the blankets for him before kissing him on the cheek and going into their bedroom to crash in their bed. He'd have to think about what action to take in the morning, maybe discuss some options with Hisashi to see what they could do. The next morning, Shota finds himself roused by his husband giving him a good morning kiss, and fingers moving some of his hair off his face. He grunts out a morning to his husband, sniffing out the cup of coffee he'd been brought and chugging it down. His husband moved back out of their room, telling him that they were making pancakes for breakfast and that Shota would lose out if he didn't get his butt up. So, with effort, he popped his bones and got out of bed. Izuku was standing on a chair, watching Hisashi flip the cat-shaped pancakes with a toss in the air, dim eyes slightly twinkling as Hisashi showed off a little. The radio was playing some upbeat pop song, with a loud bass and brass instruments accompanying the vocal artist. One, for the moment, laid closed on the dining table, present mic pen neatly placed on top of it as Shota sits in his seat. He ruffles the kid's hair on the way past, noticing Hisashi's glance. Before he slumps into the wooden chair, he sets the coffee maker going. One coffee wouldn't keep him alert this early in the morning. However, as he gets up to retrieve his caffeine shot of wakefulness, he sees the time and turns to give Hisashi a look. Cherry red eyes meet his, the kid having moved to get orange juice from the fridge, and mouths to him, "I took the day off." No wonder his husband had decided to cook breakfast, Shota thought, as the kid settled down in his seat while Hisashi plated up the cat-shaped pancakes. And the Yowler-shaped pancake for the little helper. "Thank you, Zashi-san." First name basis? Aizawa felt a tinge of jealousy but quickly buried it. He was glad the kid was comfortable with his husband, and knew Hisashi was good with kids and people in general. It was a good thing the kid felt comfortable with him here, for his stay with them. It had almost been a week since he'd first come to live with them, something that seemed strange to think about. Shota felt like it had been longer, after having the kid around the house. They hadn't taken the kid out yet, mostly to ensure his protection but partly due to the fact that Shota wanted to avoid going out and being around people as much as possible. Of course, his husband wasn't like that. "Okay, Izuku, why don't you go and get changed? We can go out to the park." The kid sits up, swinging himself from his chair to go down the hallway. Shota sends a look to the blonde as he collects the plates to wash up. The little listener has been stuck inside a compound for a year, Sho. If he's just stuck in here forever, then what makes it different to where he was before? He's still trapped. He needs to experience things a kid normally experiences. Like playing outside, meeting other kids, seeing what life can be like. We're supposed to be protecting him. Hisashi's eyes glittered. If they attack us first, that means we don't have to hunt them down. Shota sighed, but conceded. Just the local park. If anything suspicious happens, we're taking him back home. Hisashi gives him a peck on the cheek, before moving back into their room to change. Tying his hair into a bun, he moves out of the bedroom to see Hisashi wrapping a scarf around the kid's neck. Izuku himself looks fully prepared for a snowstorm, with his puffy navy blue fur-lined coat zipped up, black knee-high boots, thick trousers and his gloves and hat on. Hisashi himself is dressed in a tan beige coat, with a cherry red scarf covering his neck and some thick jeans on. His faux leather gloves were on, his hair down and resting over his shoulders. "You sure you're not hot like that, kid?" Izuku shakes his head, burying his face into the scarf as Shota sighs and removes the hat at least. "It's just the park, kid. If you want, we can come back at any time. You just need to ask." "Okay, Zawa-san." The kid hesitates, something Shota finds suspect. It felt like the kid was almost apprehensive to going to the park, which, vaguely, raised a red flag in his mind. Shouldn't the kid be excited to be outside? To be with kids his own age? If anything, Shota felt an old memory surfacing, of a time after his quirk first manifested. Kids could be cruel. Shota hoped he was wrong. Before he could say more, his husband took one of Izuku's hands, and led them out of the apartment, chattering excitedly to the kid. A small tug on his sleeve makes him look down to find a small cream-knitted glove gripping it, one he quickly removes and holds instead. He ducks his head into his capture scarf as they walk into the elevator, hiding his smile smirk as Hisashi instinctively ducks into the elevator like he usually does when his hair is gelled up like the plume of a cockatoo. He'd keep a close eye on the kid, even as he resolves to speak with Hisashi over what to do on the Quirk registration problem. As the doors close, he listens to the red-eyed pair discussing hot chocolates and daifuku, something he expected considering his husband's sweet tooth and the kid's relative inexperience. Maybe he could take the kid to a cat cafe, in the future of course. Winter had made it so that not many were out in the cold weather, meaning that when they got to the park, Shota could only really spot another family. From the looks of it, they were there with 2 children, possibly twins, around the kid's age. Part of Shota feels like he's intruding on the area. He wasn't Izuku's father. They weren't a family. It was only witness protection. But he'd do it if it would help the kid. Hizashi pulls them inside the park, causing the family to turn to them, beginning to walk over. Shota glares at his husband, as Izuku shifts on his feet but otherwise stays put. Like he was. Shota shuts down the thought, letting Hizashi lead the introduction as he feels the kid squeezing his hand. Without thought, he moves slightly forward, mustering enough politeness as he could with only 3 cups of coffee fueling him. And that must be your son. Oh, how old is he? He looks about Nami's age. His heart leaps in his chest, but he stamps it down after a traitorous moment because he wasn't the kid's father. Before he can correct the woman, his husband interjects, pulling the kid out from behind Shota's leg and smiling. It's a smile he knows well. He narrows his eyes. This is Izuku. He's 6. Hi. The girl suddenly pipes up, stepping forward as she smiles widely at the kid. Izuku stands in the same place, but Shota feels him tense. Wanna play hero chase with me and Oniai-chan? It'll be fun. Okay, Nami-chan. Izuku lets go of his hand, following the girl to the other boy, who Uchiyumi explains is her sister's son who she's looking after for the winter. Ran and Nami are practically siblings, though. Oh, just looking at them, I was sure they were twins. The mother laughed gently, a twinkle in her blue eyes as she looked at them. I get that a lot. They introduce each other as siblings, anyway. Shota keeps an eye on Izuku, who plays with the cousins by tagging each other, the chaser pretending to be a villain while the runners were the heroes. The aim was to get to the tree they were making the hostage. If they could touch the tree, they'd win. After a game of rock, paper, scissors, which Shota knew the kid outsmarted just to be a hero in the game, it was the Pinkette who was the villain. With his back turned so they could plan and gain distance, Shota watched as the kid climbed a tree, telling the girl something. She nodded with an excited expression, zipping off into the bushes as the Pinkette turned back around. As the Bluinette went charging forward, the Pinkette went for her, keeping a couple meters near the tree in case the other hero came out. What he didn't expect was the kid to drop down, land, and touch the tree. At Izuku's call, he turned left to see him, leaving the girl to pass him on his blind side. Reaching out, he was too slow to get her as she slams her hand on the tree. They celebrated for a moment, before the grumbling Pinkette called for another round and the girl was made the villain. Oh, is Izuku's quirk to do with his mind? The question put him on guard, mostly because he was used to keeping his own quirk under wraps. Regardless, he affirmed her guess, though didn't add anything. Say, did you 3 move here recently? I don't think I've seen you around before. Hizashi gives Shota a look, but the words fall out of his mouth before he can stop them. He was living with his mother and her partner before. We recently were able to take Izuku in. Hizashi gives his hand a squeeze as Uchiyumi's deep blue eyes widen and a sympathetic look twists her face like it twists Shota's stomach. Why was he making it seem like he was the boy's father? As always, his poker face kept his thoughts and emotions from the light of day. It wasn't like he could reveal the kid's identity. It would defeat the point of witness protection. He sent a look at his husband, who just sent him a smile and soothed the mother's worries. It's okay, Uchiyumi-san. We're excited to finally have Izuku with us. Her laugh tinkered in the winter air, a relieved sound. I see. Well, it sounds like you're doing great. For the rest of the time, they occasionally, read Hizashi and the mother, chattered about normal things, while Shota kept an eye on Izuku. It must have been a good hour or so of them in the park, and the kids seemed to slightly relax around his playmates. Eventually, the kids had tired themselves out. As they split ways, the 3 waved at each other, turning in opposite directions as Izuku stayed between them. Under the reddened cheeks and scarf, Shota spotted the small smile on the boy's face and buried his own further into his capture weapon, feeling his lips tug up. So, little listener, how was it? As they waited at the lights to cross the street, Shota spied a small light in those wide red eyes. It was Fund Zashi-san. Oh yeah? What did you learn? Nami-chan's quirk allows her to convert her stamina into objects, like platforms or ball. It's really useful for hero work. She said her cousin had a quirk like her, but it had something to do with spirals. Rankoen's quirk allows him to pinpoint people's locations, like a radar. It works through the ground, but if he trained it, he'd be able to scan open spaces and buildings with more floors. Somehow, Shota finds himself talked into stopping at a cafe so Hizashi can buy the kid different sweets to try. While Hizashi orders a platter of different wagashi for him and the kid, he orders himself a black coffee with a triple shot of espresso and a tiramisu. The waitress, who Izuku had already quizzed on her quirk, swiftly moved back over to them with their large order. From what Shota had surmised, the college student had a quirk that linked with perfect balance. It passively allowed her perfect balance, but also allowed her to instinctively find the perfect balance of anything she could see or touch. As she placed down their orders, she also laid down an extra order of strawberry daifuku, winking at the kid as she said, "It's on the house. Enjoy your sweet cat iron." "Thank you, Kei-san." "Here, little listener, eat this." The kid reached over and plucked up the stick of dango, hesitantly taking a bite. A few seconds later, his eyes widened in surprise, the spark flaring his eyes for a moment as he chewed the glazed dough ball. Hizashi grins and then nudges over the takoyaki, before pointing out the matcha mochi ball and the yokon slice. Each time, the kid's face would show for a moment his emotions. In the end, Shota nudged over his tiramisu, which the kid forked up a mouthful of, eyes widening as he took another bite. It was things like this that reminded him that the kid was still a kid, regardless of how he acted sometimes, or his experiences. He ducked his head into his scarf as the kid wolfed down the strawberry daifuku, something that made Hizashi promise to show the kid to make it home someday. A call from the counter for their takeout drinks had Hizashi up, and Shota reached over with a napkin to wipe off some of the anko that was on his cheek. Halfway through the action, he realized what he was doing, froze for a moment, before wiping the rest off. "He isn't your kid," he had to repeat to himself, as he sat back in his seat. "You had some red bean paste on your face, kid?" "Ah, thank you, Zawa-san. You can call me by my first name, if you want." The kid's eyes widen, before falling back down. "Okay, I will, Sho-san." His husband catches on to it, beaming as he sets the hot chocolate takeaway cup before the kid, tucking a takeaway bag under his arm with a twinkle in his eye Shota knows well. He accepts his to-go coffee from the blonde, standing up from their seat as they move to go back home. Their waitress cheerily waves them all goodbye, telling the kid to stop by another time for more sweets, before moving to seat some more customers. The kid's hand holds his once more, as Hizashi stays on the other side of the kid on their walk back. If he notices that there's cinnamon in his coffee, he doesn't comment, and instead drinks his coffee through it as he sees the kid brighten for a moment as he savors his hot chocolate. Tucking the kid into his bed, Shota knows now is the time to speak with Hizashi about the kid. Since bringing the kid home, they hadn't had the proper conversation over housing or taking care of him yet. Bits and pieces had been shared, but the topic was long overdue. With the current issue of registering the kid's quirk, there came the issue of his identity. After all, Shota knew the kid would be instantaneously linked to his father once the news broke out on the dragon. So that left their only option, a new identity. Stepping out of the kid's room, he silently moved back into the kitchen to where Hizashi was humming as he cleared the countertop of crumbs. Yowler was sat watching the blonde, while Coffee Bean had stolen one side of the couch, basking in his recent meal. The kid needs to have his quirk registered. Hizashi looks at him for a moment from behind his glasses as he throws the crumbs and rag in the trash. The blonde sits down at the dining table, elbows resting on the wood while Shota settles in another seat. That would link him to his family. Shota sighs, knowing his husband is only prompting him. "I know, Zashi. But the only solution I can think of is changing the kid's name and appearance. And he's already had a lot of changes done to him." Hizashi finishes off, his mustache dipping as he frowns. Shota thinks of the picture he'd seen, of a bright smiling green-haired and green-eyed boy, being squeezed in a close hug by another greenette, both bursting with happiness. Midoriya Izuku. Tsukachi had dug up the report on the fire that had the mother, Midoriya Izuku, die. How the boy was taken in by his father, taken out of school, slowly withdrawn from the outside world until it seemed he no longer existed. Then to the memory of a boy lying face up in an alley, covered in bandages, with dirty, black hair and a single dull red eye gazing up into the rain. Akitani Izuku. A boy so close to the edge that he'd reminded Shota of a spider lily when he'd looked into his eye. What would be left of the boy, Shota thought, if they changed more of him? He sighed again. Already, the kid would need therapy to overcome what he'd been through. Add on an identity crisis? Closing his eyes, he leaned back in his chair, into the wooden back. Why not change his family name to Aizawa? Shota looks sharply at his husband. What? You can see it, Sho. The blonde reasons, unfazed by his edge tone. To anyone who looks, you would look like father and son. Sho, you have the same quirk. This way, if anyone goes looking, they will have a harder time linking him to his past than just a random name. Hizashi flashes him a grin as he adds. I know the little listener would want that too. Just ask him. Shota had thought about it. Logically, it was the best option. This way, the kid's similarities to the dragon would be swept under the rug, and if anyone poked into the boy's past, it wouldn't raise any suspicions like adoption would. They could say that he lived with his mother and her partner. It had worked as cover to the mother in the park. It was almost too perfect for them. But changing his family name to Shota's, that would mean the kid would be staying with them on a permanent basis. There was no logical reason he wouldn't be able to care for his own son, after all. Would the kid want that? Shota had to remember that the kid was here for protection, not as a foster child or adopted child, but to keep Izuku safe for the time being. If he took advantage of his role as protector in this circumstance, would it really be the kid's choice? Shota closed his dry eyes once more. It wasn't like they had many options. Putting the kid in the system when already the Yakuza group had infiltrated the police force wasn't going to happen on his watch. He'd made a promise to the kid to protect him, and he would. Handing the kid over to another hero would put the kid in a spotlight and land him in the same kind of danger living with them would cause. It wasn't logical to move the kid when the result was the same. His eyes connected with Hizashi's again. He's in witness protection, Zashi. We're not his parents. Expecting that hurt look again, the one from months ago, Shota felt a frown tug at his lips as Hizashi gave him a knowing look. Just ask him what he wants, Shota. A hand squeezes his cherry red eyes soft and warm as they held his own. I know I wouldn't mind having the little helper here permanently. There's a twinkle in Hizashi's eyes as he adds, I know Namuri's excited to meet the little guy. Shota groans, imagining what their friend would do when if meeting the kid. The next day, Hizashi was working and the two of them were back in their usual routine. The kid was sat in front of the TV, the one open and another hero pen in his hand, scribbling away. Yowler had laid out in front of the notebook, purring loudly as her tail occasionally swept over the kid's open pages. Outside, the weather was still cool as they began transitioning into December, Hizashi looking forward to taking the kid to a market, after finding out the kid had never been to one. Shota had simply sent him a look. Earlier, he'd made the kid some snacks, while he dozed on the couch and answered the kid's questions. In a rare lull of rapid scratching of graphite on paper, Shota knew he'd need to break the relaxed atmosphere they'd finally gotten in order to get ahead of the curb in their current problem. Kid, Izuku looked at him, dim red eyes curious. We need to talk about some things concerning the case. Catching the kid tense, he sighs as the calm air of their apartment goes tense. It's about what will need to happen to you, going forward. Tensed shoulders drop, but Shota can see the kid's red eyes searching his for more information, picking things apart to see the full picture. Is this about my father, Sho-san? Partly. He can't help the tug of his lips at hearing the kid call him that. It's more about your connection to him as it stands. That I'm his son. Dipping his head, Shota gestures for the kid to sit next to him as he makes him some room. He mutes the TV, turning to face the kid as he internally sighs. They needed to get ahead of the inevitable capture of the Hafuku-kai, ahead of the train wreck incoming for the kid. Divert the approaching chaos away from the boy if they could. The raid was planned to go down in 3 days' time, after reconnaissance had confirmed their information, compiling more to aid in their plan of attack. We have some options. Shota starts, as the kid settles beside him, his fingers absently picking at his bandages. They'd be off the kid, hopefully, tomorrow, with Shizenji dropping by for another visit. Shota continued, the most effective outcome would be to change your appearance and your name. You would need to have some changes to your background, but it would mostly stay the same. If you choose not to change your appearance, we can manage with a different name for you, and play off your resemblance to the dragon as just that, a resemblance, not a relation. Keeping your name the same isn't an option, at least your family name. Midoriya is also out of the question. There's a record of your mother's marriage to your father. Shota lets the kid think for a moment, getting up to make them some drinks. This was the kid's decision, and he couldn't influence it. Even if he knew that using his family name was almost a perfect solution. Shota knew his husband wasn't wrong. He and the kid looked like father and son to anyone who saw them. But he needed the kid to make his own decision. Too many choices had been stripped from him already in his short life. Enough so, that now the kid was too mature for a normal 6-year-old to act. When he gets back, he sees that Izuku is writing in the back of his notebook, seeming to judge the words before crossing them out in one straight line to write something else. With the clunk of him placing the kid's green tea in front of him, the writing stops and Izuku puts one on the couch arm. Think over what you want to happen. You can give me your answer tomorrow. He took a gulp of his coffee, ignoring the burn down his throat as he decides that lunch for the kid was due. It'd give Izuku some space to think over his options, something Shota trusted the kid would do rationally. I will personally make sure your decision is carried out. A scarred hand reaches forward to grip the cup of green tea, the other resting over the corner of his notebook, fingering the pages for a moment before pulling it down to open again. Shota leaves him to it for now, preparing some bowls of butadon as the TV gets put back on, the sounds of crashing and a reporter detailing the fights that had happened today in the background. Before he leaves, he hears the kid quietly acknowledge his words, the scribbling starting up once more with vigor. Pushing wet strands of his black hair out of the way, Shota sighs as he sits back on the bed. Before his tired eyes sit opened files, spread out over their bed, with pictures and words, all of them he had read. But he reread them, to make sure he had it memorized, feeling his frown deepen as he stared down at the picture of a man. His freckled face showed his teeth as he put his hand on another man's shoulder, that trembled even in the still image. Clearly this other man was terrified of the subject of this photograph, and for good reason. Akatani Hisashi. He was dressed in a suit, neat and proper, his face a spitting image of Izuku's own, the freckles identical, the hair just as wild and curly, raven black. There was no softness in his cheeks though. Instead his jaw was defined, eyes narrowed. What made his blood boil was the clear golden band on his ring finger, well cared for. Shota himself had one, kept safely on a chain around his neck, the matching band in the care of a loud blonde, out in the city with the kid. After the kid's words, the report Tsukachi had sent to him of the tragic accident that had occurred at the Midoriya residence, that had killed the boy's mother. It twisted his stomach. Already, the officers who had written up the report were being questioned on their ties to the Hafukukai, which Shota knew for certain they were tied to, be it from bribery or as members of the group, but the financial investigations would have to wait until the police had their warrants approved by the judge. But that would have to wait until the raid was conducted, and the dragon was in custody. Putting the picture down, willing himself to place his emotions into the back of his mind, he let his eyes rest on the newest report, eyes falling onto the accompanying photographs captured, showing patrol patterns, security measures, poise and confirmed current affairs inside the group. Informants had sold them the knowledge that there was a bounty out for Izuku, instructed to bring him alive and intact, along with a description of his appearance. 14,200,000 yen was being offered to anyone who found and brought the kid to his father, which had Shota arguing against allowing the kid out of the house until they had arrested the Hafukukai. Hisashi had shot him down and pulled Izuku out the door to get some fresh air, his words easily recalled in his mind. They'll have to fight me before they even get close to the little listener. Tucking another slip of paper inside the file, Shota packed away his work, picking up his empty mugs and taking them into the kitchen. Izuku and his husband would be due back soon, and he'd need to get his nap in before the loud blonde brought his liviness back into their humble abode. Flopping onto the couch, he allows the permanent exhaustion to sweep him into sleep, his thoughts quieting as he succumbs to unconsciousness. Zashi-san? Hizashi's heart swells with warmth at the nickname, feeling it bleed easily into his expression as Izuku looks up at him. Although those red eyes of his, so similar to his own, are dim, there's a calmness to them that Hizashi notices more and more every time he looks into them. Sometimes, the dimness lightens, bringing out more of the child the boy was before what he'd been through had changed him. Of course, Hizashi knew he would never be the same, not after Obeir, but they were making some positive progress with Izuku. What do you need, my little helper? A covered hand fingers over the corner of his one notebook, before opening it up and holding it hesitantly out for Hizashi to look into. The blonde feels how important this moment is to not, under any circumstances, mess up as the young boy trusts him with his notebook. His notebook, which he kept with him constantly, as if a lapse in vigilance would make the book disappear. Carefully taking the notebook into his hands, he drops his eyes to the double-page spread before him, feeling his heart thud in his chest as he read over the childish writing, analyzing his husband and how to approach him to ask. Could you help me ask Sho-san to be my dad, Zashi-san? Every fiber in his being wants to sweep Izuku up and spin him around in joy, screaming into the air to anyone that could hear that. Yes, yes, yes. He wants to storm home right now to tell Shota that his considerations are sweet and Shota-like, but this was their kid, all right, and if anyone wanted to take him away, prepare for a throwdown. He manages to hold himself back to a wide cheek-splitting grin, exclaiming, I sure will, Izuku. Come hop up on the bench, my lil champ. Izuku sits himself as close to Hizashi as the boy's fear will allow, his gloved hand pointing to some lines he'd thought of to appeal to Shota, ones that Hizashi indulged because there was no conceivable way his husband would say no to having Izuku as his kid. Any doubts that Shota would come up with, Hizashi vowed to fight, knowing that having Izuku be with them would not only help the kid, help Shota, it would be right. There was this feeling of completeness that Hizashi couldn't shake when the three of them were around the table, eating home-cooked food. How normal it felt to have thoughts of where to take Izuku on their next day off together, to showing pictures of his son to his work colleagues when they showed their own family photos. It was as if a missing link had clicked into place, one he hadn't felt had been missing in the first place. How about this and this? Izuku read where he'd pointed, before a small tilt of his lips smiled at him. No, Zashi-san. I'm not wearing cat ears. Grinning, Hizashi pushes back up his slipping glasses, tucking a flyaway blonde tuft of hair behind his ear as he exaggeratedly stroked his mustache. Then let's put them on Yowler. Shaking his fluffy head of hair, Izuku's eyes lightened in amusement, before he pointed back to the page. Hizashi counts it as a win as he gets serious for Izuku, their drinks beside them, keeping the cool November breeze at bay. Hearing the front door open, Shota keeps his eyes closed as his loud husband tries to be quiet, for once. It doesn't work, with the loud whispering and the fact that his husband bumps into 3 different things on his way through the hallway, but Shota remains pseudo-asleep in curiosity. The kid's soft pitter-patters creep closer to him, artfully avoiding the creaky floorboards to get nearer to him. As the boy grows closer, the familiar scent of coffee gets stronger, causing a smile to come to his lips that he hides by pushing his face into the couch cushions. Now beside his prone figure, the boy halts, before the cup is put on the coffee table, if the soft sound of the cup hitting the coaster is anything to go by. He hears the gentle tearing of a page before those quiet socked footsteps retreat, and Hizashi takes the boy down the other hallway, towards the rest of their small apartment. Cracking his eyes open, Shota hears a few bones pop as he stretches, pausing for a moment on the coffee cup and folded note beside it. Reaching out for the note, he smooths it open, seeing how it's addressed to him. Clearly, it's the kid's writing, the nickname confirming it. Dear Shosen, you asked me to change my name. You told me to think about it. I did think about it. I thought about it again and again, but the only one that I wanted kept popping up. If you will let me, Sho-san, can I have your family name? Izuku, hopefully, Aizawa. Again and again, Shota read over the note, feeling a warmth threaten to burst out of him as his stomach swooped. His dry eyes meant nothing as they widened, his socked feet finding the ground as he ran towards Izuku's bedroom, pushing the door open to see Hisashi and his son putting away some new clothes. He doesn't stop as he walks to Izuku, who shuffles on his feet. Nervous, Shota knows. Not that he needs to be, when he's made Shota one of the happiest men in the world right now. But before he celebrates, and how much he wants to celebrate, to grab a hold of the boy and hold him close, to make sure he's safe and happy with them and no longer in danger, he crouches down, holding up the letter. His husband watches from the side, as he meets Izuku's eyes, asking to make sure, to know that the kid was deciding for himself, that he wanted to stay with them. Are you sure about this kid? I'm sure, Sho-san. Feeling his eyes soften, he can't stop himself from wrapping his arms loosely around the boy, around Izuku, who pauses, before small arms wrap around him back. And if that doesn't seal the deal, Shota doesn't know what else would. Welcome home, Aizawa Izuku. Schematics, a young rescue heroine recently graduated from Ketsubutsu, had drawn out and explained the structure of Alcotech. 3 stories above ground acted as a front for the base underneath, which expanded beyond the modern building, like an aggressively invasive infestation of hornets growing their hive. It spilled out beneath their very feet, a network of tunnels and caverns converted into a wide-reaching network of rooms to house all manners of horrors and goods. From the information Sir Night-Eye and other heroes had gathered, a large amount of chemicals and support gear were being held within the base, waiting to be sold off to other villain and criminal groups. There were sleeping quarters, offices, training grounds, entertainment rooms, storage areas. The basic format seemed to be, after hours and nights spent poring over the evidence they had gathered, that the lower down a person went, the more valuable or dangerous things got, though this was keeping in mind one glaring detail: omniscience. With their quirk, anything going in or out of their base would be seen, meaning that they'd have to take out the villain first and foremost to remain undetected. With them a constant shadow beside the dragon, that made going through quietly almost impossible. It was imperative to Aizawa and the rest of the gathered infiltration team to keep the Hafukukai in the dark until they were able to strike, or they'd be kicking the metaphorical hornet's nest. Thinking about it made Izuku's escape a lucky gift. It also meant that, while omniscience mainly stayed back to guard and protect the base, they had times where their ever-watchful eyes were closed. All they needed was a moment where the villain would be otherwise occupied from keeping watch of the comings and goings of the base. A small window to allow the heroes to slip in and strike while they were off their guard. That would be soon. Aizawa shifted his capture scarf, letting it rest readily over his shoulders, ends gently fluttering as he watched from his vantage point. He tried not to let his mind wander back to his son. His son, Izuku. It was surreal to think Izuku had wanted to take his name and trusted him after what his own father had put him through. Placing his goggles on, he pushed those thoughts down, making way for logic and reason unburdened by emotion. His goal was to make sure the dragon was captured and safely delivered to the police to be processed. To ensure the dragon could be sent to Tartarus, to rot. He kept dry half-lidded eyes on the sleek chromium walls and sharp angular glass windows of Alcotech, even as the light drizzle of rain fell down harder. Team 3, be ready to move. Pulling up his goggles, they smoothly rested over his eyes, slitting his vision as his muscles flexed in preparation. Behind him, the pair of heroes completing his team readied themselves in anticipation, a quiet sound of knuckles cracking and fabric swishing reaching Aizawa's ears. All teams move in. Throwing out his capture scarf, Shota launches into action, his teammates following him into the premises as the front door comes crashing down. As the door closed behind his husband, Hisashi looked down to meet those dim red eyes of Izuku, who would officially be his and Shota's son by next week once the papers were processed and Izuku's new identity was rubber-stamped. Under one arm, the fluffy-haired boy had his one notebook, a pen themed as Mandalay in his hand as the other fiddled with the hem of his teddy bear hoodie. Crouching down to his height, Hisashi rested his elbows on his thighs, palms held under his chin as he pushed down his own concern for Shota. He'd be fine. He was just more concerned about what would be left of the dragon once his cat-loving insomniac of a husband was through with him. and how much Hisashi could do to the monster before he was at risk of losing his license. Moreover, seeing Izuku's worry over Shota was worse. So, Izuku, how would you like to try popcorn? Tilting his head in a way he found cute, Hisashi watched his adorable mini Aizawa think for a moment. Okay, Zashi-san. Smiling easily in excitement, his hands clapped together before leading the kid into the kitchen, where Coffee Bean had decided to lay himself out across the entryway. Marching over the large cat, he led Izuku over to the counters. Great. It's really easy to make and really tasty. One bandaged and one slightly scarred hand carefully places down the notebook and pen on the dining room table as they pass it into the kitchen proper. Getting a pot, Hisashi searches the cupboards for the popcorn kernels, asking Izuku to gather the salt and sugar to flavor their popcorn with. Unearthing the bag from the depths of the cupboard, he quickly checks it over, before getting everything set up. Izuku stands on a chair beside him as he puts the oil in the pot, to make sure the kernels don't stick to the bottom, then pours in a generous amount of kernels and shuts the lid on. Watching Izuku, he sees the moment he hears the popping sounds, his red eyes brightening in curiosity as he removes the pot from the heat and reveals what's inside. Tada! Here's our popcorn. Quickly pouring the batch out in the biggest bowl they had in the kitchen, he flavors it for Izuku, shaking it encouragingly for him to taste. Try it, Izuku. Hesitantly, Izuku plucks a single fluffy popped kernel off of the mountain, popping it in his mouth. His eyes widen, lips ghosting an amazed smile as he plucks up a few more without asking, plopping them past his lips and munching happily. Grinning in pride, Hisashi takes a large handful, quickly shoving them into his mouth then setting the bowl to the side. If he notices how Izuku's eyes follow the bowl with longing, he doesn't promise to hold more popcorn movie nights in future. Definitely not. Let's set up the sofa, Izuku. Nothing is better than popcorn with movies. Izuku follows along with the blonde's idea, helping round up the blankets and pillows to keep them warm and snug whilst watching movies. Yowler prances in Izuku's shadow when he retrieves his present mic blanket from his room, which he'd exchanged for his notebook and pen. If only Sho could be here. Shaking his head, he would get another opportunity to sit his husband down to watch movies with him and their son. Hey Izuku, are there any movies you would like to watch tonight? Tilting his head back over his shoulder, he sees Izuku shuffle on his feet, a sign he doesn't know how to answer. With a softer smile, Hisashi reassures the boy that it was all right. To distract him, he asks Izuku to get the popcorn and their snacks while he finds them a movie and dims the lights. Yowler jumps herself up onto the sofa armrest, circling a few times until she's comfortable in her chosen spot. Zashi-san, I have the popcorn. Looking over the rim of his glasses, he spies the blurry image of Izuku, holding in his hands a giant bowl of freshly made popcorn for them both. Tilting his head up, he peers through his lenses, easily cheering at the mountain of popped kernels his son had brought in while he'd sorted out their first movie of the night. If he notices how the popcorn mountain had slightly shrunk during the absence of his watch over it, he merely turns a blind eye to it. Even though he wanted to be out there with his husband, out there, bringing in the man who had harmed their kid, he instead had the best job in the world tonight. Showing his kid the beautiful world of Wisne. Wisne movies were a comfort to Hisashi, a comfort he hoped to share with Izuku. Yeah. Fist bumping the air, the blonde is quick to hop up and move himself to the final task of dimming the lights. The pair, namely Hisashi who had no reservations throwing a pile of blankets and pillows onto their sofa, got settled into their nest to start the movie marathon, Hisashi flinging himself onto the cushions as Izuku hopped up and wrapped himself in his blanket. Between them, sat a pile of snacks, as well as their hoard of popcorn and their drinks on the table. Lifting the remote, Hisashi turned to Izuku with bright cherry red eyes as he announced, "Okay Izuku, are you ready to watch the best Wisne film ever?" Izuku leans forward, his interest piqued as Hisashi joyfully grins. Even if their son was incredibly intelligent for his age and had skeletons haunt him through all that he'd been through, Hisashi hoped he could give him a bit of his childhood back. Starting with this. Alright, then let's start. There was something off. Shota could feel it. Feel it in the way the guards they took down were easy, that the passageways seemed empty. Although quiet, his fast-paced footsteps seemed to echo in the cemented tunnels of the underground, which he tore through hallway after hallway following the map he'd been given. To cover more area, it was decided that they would separate, leaving Shota on his own as his teammates ventured down another hall. If any of them encountered any of the inner circle of the Hofukukai, they were told to hit the beacon on their costumes. "My father. Be careful, Sho-san." In the distance, he could hear a single set of footsteps. It was slow, almost languid, in its rhythm. Confident. A spark ignites in the darkness, a flash of light, of a fanged grin, and gleaming scales, growing, closer and closer. The heat. Rolling under the fire, Shota activates his quirk, hand hitting the beacon. Glaring into the distance, shoes appear from the shadows. From these polished shoes, black slacks and the hem of an overcoat flutter, leading up to the distinguishable figure of the dragon himself. In one hand he holds a lit cigarette, where smoke rises as the tip burns orange, making the golden band around his finger glint. His other hand casually rests inside his waistcoat pocket. Now in the light, Shota can see those features the dragon has, even more vivid in person than through a photograph. He sees those features of his sons in the man. From the carmine eyes, the shape of his nose, and the unruly mess of black hair atop his head. However, none of the man's shared similarities hold any of the softness of Izuku's. His arms and chest fill out in bulky muscle under the tailored clothing, his height and build dangerous and intimidating with the capacity for violence and dangerous reputation he holds. "That's an interesting quirk. It's almost like my son's quirk." Lifting up his hand, the dragon, Akatani Hisashi, Izuku's father, takes a puff of his cigarette, the end burning brighter as he essays in the hit. Amber reflects off his scales, bouncing new shadows over his cheeks before rescinding as he blows out a stream of gray smoke, letting the cigarette be tossed away. "Hey, you wouldn't happen to know him, would you? He's about yay high." His ringed hand flattens, waving at his waist, near the height of Izuku, and shares a family resemblance. Sizing the man up, Shota thinks about the best way to take down the dragon, now that stealth is out the window. If he allowed the dragon to use his quirk, there would be no way to avoid the flames from this close. A long narrow hallway would act like a channel for the flames to fill, making this the perfect place for the Yakuza exec to unleash his quirk. That's why the dragon didn't leave the tunnels. Adjusting his cuffs, the dragon tilted his head, showcasing his sharp jawline as smoke escaped his lips. "Very well. If you don't want to talk, I'll make you. Unlike that other annoying guy." Readying his capture weapon, Shota rushed forward, throwing out his scarf in a feint to get in close and sweep him. A smoking smirk widens over the dragon's scaled cheeks as a spark appears in the back of his throat, before Aizawa cuts it off with his quirk. He has to bend backwards at the sudden right hook, his leg getting stopped by the sudden guard that grabs and judo flips him over. Thinking quickly, he jabs his elbow into Akatani's unguarded face while he lets some of the ribbon-like tool go, seeing it wrap around his opponent's huge arm and pull the man off balance with the momentum he flies at. A jolt flings him to the right, his drying eyes catches those hands grip the wrapped white-gray material, a manic look in his malicious red eyes as his feet brace like a hammer thrower. Crush. Brushing his hand calmly through that fluffy head of hair, Hisashi stifles his yawn behind his hand. A few wayward pieces of popcorn and candy wrappers littered around the pair, though most had been piled into the now empty popcorn bowl on the coffee table. Yowler had moved herself to lie next to Coffee Bean, the fat feline having rolled himself into the living room sometime during the third and fourth movie to accost a stray couch cushion. Izuku had fallen asleep halfway through the fifth Wisney movie, slipping down to rest himself over Hisashi's lap in his sleep. It reminds Hisashi of himself, his mama massaging her fingers through his hair, soothing him after he'd lost control again. Through his fingers, Izuku's hair was incredibly soft and thick, making it easy to gently run his hands over. From the way his son seemed to nudge himself into the gentle ruffles, like a cat, he continued to comfort the sleeping boy. It seemed to ease some of the troubles inside his mind, or Hisashi liked to think so. It was a moment he wanted to last for longer, but having the weight of a 6-year-old over his legs for a long period of time was starting to make his legs fall asleep. Carefully, he moved his long arms under Izuku's knees and back, shimmying the blanketed bundle closer as he wiggled himself to perch on the couch. With a heave, he's up, the sleeping child held in his arms only shifting a little before settling. Yowler, as if sensing the absence that would ensue when one of her humans took her favorite human away, batted away Coffee Bean's tail and rolled herself to stand on all fours, following after with an inquiring meow as Hisashi started down the hallway. Bare feet hit the cool floor as he moved, blowing away a stray blonde bang that fell from his messy bun as he brought his son, Izuku, to his room. To think, it had only been a short time and already it felt right. It felt completely natural to think of Izuku as his son, as a part of his and Shota's family. From the subtle things, such as the way he wanted to completely spoil Izuku rotten with different foods he could try, to sharing ideas and thoughts around his notebooks and taking him outside to experience life. Turning right at the ajar door of his son's room, he nudged it wide with his shoulder, feeling the warmth radiate from Izuku's body as he stepped over the threshold. In place of the collecting dust and neglected storage area he and Shota had made this spare bedroom, it was now a lived-in room for Izuku. Elements of the boy he was before shone through in the posters and hero merchandise he'd chosen. There was a level of cleanliness to the room that Hisashi hadn't expected from a 6-year-old, such as the organized notebooks on his old desk, to the separation of hard toys and soft toys and how all his clothes were folded and put into specific drawers. Part of Hisashi wanted to put it down to just Izuku's maturity, but the other part. Placing him down gently, Hisashi rested his elbows onto the bedside, daring to brush some wayward strands of hair from Izuku's closed eyes. As he pulls his hand back, his other rises to unwrap Izuku from his blanket, which always gives him a light feeling in his chest at the fact it was one of his present mic designs. Instead of folding it to put at the end of Izuku's bed, he spread out the purple and yellow throw over the neutral bedspread. And if the way those bandaged and lightly scarred fingers searched for the edge of the fleece and pulled it closer didn't squeeze his heart, an occurrence he was getting a lot lately, then he'd better book for a doctor to check him over. Their Arabian Mao brushed against his legs for a moment, before he rewarded her with a gentle pat. Her purr was low but content, before she flicked her cream tail and jumped up onto the bed to join the fluffy head of Izuku on his pillow. Look after him while he sleeps, yeah? Spoken softly, he sees how Yowler looks him in the eyes with her green ones, flicking her tail at him almost dismissively. She settled around the head of their cat's favorite human with a light but to the unruly mop of black curls taking up the majority of the pillow space. Shaking his head at himself, he almost hears his husband's grumbles before his hand grips the handle of the bedroom door. As he quietly closes it, Hisashi left a crack just in case Izuku woke up in the middle of the night for a glass of water or from a bad dream and needed one of them, or if someone tried to take Izuku away from their home. Leaving the night light on in the hallway, Hisashi checked their windows and doors, before beginning to clean up their living room, phone held close like always as he busied himself for a long night of worry. Swerving under another plume of fire, Shota's quick to erase the dragon's quirk, stopping the ignition as Akatani smirks and strikes his flint rings against each other, generating a spark. The gas in the air crackles as it's lit, causing the underground hero to blink and disengage as the Yakuza exec sends another jet of fire at him. Father's quirk is called fire breathing. It allows him to breathe fire. Izuku had told him, pen tapping nervously on the page he was reading from a black notebook. Shota had noticed the difference almost immediately, as instead of the neat label placed on the front with a carefully scribbled name, this notebook was nondescript. He had his suspicions on why it was so, the implications leaving him to infer that Izuku had been making a notebook about villains in his spare time. When Izuku trusted him more, if he ever would trust someone so deeply again, Shota would have a talk about these notebooks with the kid. But his quirk isn't to breathe fire. Izuku continued, a passion hidden behind the small furrows of his brows. When he breathes in, his lungs create a R reaction that makes a flammable gas. He ignites the gas in his throat as he breathes out, which lets him breathe fire. Hearing footsteps bounce off the walls, Shota picks himself up once more, diving to the right. Try as he might, he couldn't stop thinking of two small hands covered in blooming red blisters. Of burns that trailed up a pair of short arms. The arms of a child. Of Izuku. Izuku, whose father was right here. Here for Shota to follow through on his self-made promise. He'd make sure his kid would never need to see the man who'd hurt him, who'd taken away the boy's mother. Taken away the happy life of a kid and tried to turn him into a villain. He springs forward to punch the dragon in the diaphragm, his blistering side protesting as he twists. Moving pulls at the tender skin along his side, earned from a close call of the dragon's quirk. But that doesn't stop him. Neither does the fire that makes his eyes sting behind his goggles and dry out quicker in the heat. Every bend smarts at the bruises on his back that would no doubt show up in the next few hours, but that's what he gets for hitting the concrete so hard. He's glad he had enough time to protect his skull from bashing into the wall. A spark gets him to feint and punch down at Akatani's stomach, making the fire stutter out in a weaving around a nasty right hook, he drives his heel into the back of the dragon's knee, elbow coming down hard onto the back of the man's collared neck. Warily, Shota steps towards the fallen dragon. Part of him skirts along the edges of where the Yakuza lies on the ground, vigilant in case this was some kind of trick. A way to make him drop his guard, to leave him open, defenseless. But as he efficiently positions the dragon into a pin, there's no final last-ditch grapple or hidden weapon pulled on him. If there was, he wouldn't hesitate to dislocate one of Akatani's arms. Digging out his cuffs, he binds the Yakuza exec's wrist behind the man's back, grabbing his bottle of eye drops to lubricate his scratchy, dried-out eyes as he awaits the new arrivals. If he makes the cuffs just a little tighter than necessary, he's just being cautious. You seem to know more than you should about me, hero. Sharply, Shota turns. He should have been knocked out cold. Shota slips the bottle of eye drops back into his pouch. Fingers nimbly grip onto the edges of his tattered capture weapon as he watches Akatani. Almost like someone told you. Contemplation hangs in the air around the Yakuza, who's too calm about this. Too relaxed. It can be seen in the way his shoulders rest back to ease the strain of having his hands cuffed behind his back, in the way he sits back on his heels, thighs comfortable in his kneel. Even the taunting smirk and calculating eyes set Shota's nerves on edge. Why did he let himself be cuffed? He didn't like this. It didn't make logical sense. Static fills his ear when he tries to radio in, hand dropping back down as he wraps the dragon in his capture weapon to escort him to a police truck. If he makes the bindings just a little too tight, he pretends not to notice as he tugs the villain out, the black shoes echoing as they walk, a few scales dropping to the ground. He can ignore the chafing of his burns and throbbing of his bruises that pang with every step forward for a little longer. Long enough to have Akatani on his way to his very own prison cell. There were few criminals nowadays that Shota could say he personally wanted to see rot in Tartarus, but Akatani Hisashi was steadily becoming the first on the list. As he watched through the one-way mirror of the interrogation room, at the man cuffed to the chair, all he could think about was how wrong this all felt. Even with the metal around the dragon's wrists and the scorches over his tailored suit, the Yakuza executive still seemed relaxed. Comfortable. It was like the man was in a business meeting, his shoulders relaxed and posture loose. His smirk remained fixed to his face, cast by the harsh fluorescent light above, the remaining patchy scales still clinging to his cheeks reflecting the cold brightness. I am Detective Tsukachi Naomasa. The time is 22:26. On Wednesday, November 29, 21XX. Before we begin, I must tell you that you do not have to say anything, but may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand, Akatani-sen? Tilting his head, Akatani replies. I understand, detective. Tsukachi nods in return, pulling out his notepad and flipping open the cover. I am more than happy to answer any of your questions to the best of my ability, detective. In exchange for one thing, lips curling like the cat that got the cream, Akatani leans in. His chains rattle with his movements, messy hair sweeping his forehead as he tilts his head. My son. Failure to disclose evidence can also lead to the prosecution adding charges to your case in the court of law, Akatani-san. Akatani smiles. Shota narrows his eyes at the dragon as the psychologist mutters observations to the chief of police. He's a textbook narcissist, displaying feelings of superiority over Detective Tsukachi and clear arrogance in his posture. Legs spread out, head tilted back, eyes looking down on his conversation partner. He's still of the mind he has all the power here. And what do we do to break that view? Woof. Pacing slowly to the right, Shota can see in the reflection how the psychologist, his consultancy ID card reading as a Dr. Richter, remains fixated on Akatani, as if he were an interesting petri dish to be analyzed further. Narcissists have issues with any perceived criticisms they receive. They just don't know how to deal with it. They only truly care about themselves and being the envy of everyone else, so bringing up anyone else will only reinforce his superiority complex. Pausing before the glass again, the psychologist adjusts his glasses. He'll find it hard to regulate his emotions and reactions. The easiest reaction to look for is rage. So, try to rile him up. Get him mad. Shota knows it would be illogical to storm inside the interrogation room and slam his fist into the self-entitled sneering face of Akatani Hisashi, just to achieve the goal of getting the man angry enough to tell them all they need to know, but it'd feel pretty satisfying. There was no way in hell that the man sitting in cuffs and acting as if all of this was going to his master plan would be getting to his son. A click of Tsukachi's pen shows the detective heard the advice, the tool being crossed over the blank page in his open notepad to try and throw Akatani off his rhythm. Akatani-san, I cannot disclose the details of an ongoing case while with the alleged dragon of the Hafukukai. Rusted red eyes narrow as Akatani parrots. Alleged? Tsukachi pauses. What were you doing inside Alcotech, Akatani-san? I manage the company in my boss's absence, detective. Your boss? Fujiwara? Daichi. A sharp tooth gleams as Akatani dips his head in a shallow nod. I will need verbal answers, Akatani-san. A flutter in the jaw gives away his annoyance. Yes, Fujiwara is my boss. It says here that you are the managing director of Alcotech. How were you able to get such a position within only 5 years of employment with the company and without any certification? Bespectacled gold eyes glimmer in the reflection of the one-way mirror. You have quite the hotshot detective, chief. Detective Tsukachi is one of our best and brightest detectives, Dr. Richter. Woof. Trust and loyalty go a long way, detective. Not that many in the police force would understand such sentiments. Akatani rebukes, lips splitting open to bare his white teeth. Arms now resting on the table, the Yakuza executive crosses his legs and settles his head from where he'd been leaning it back. There's mirth in his eyes now, a smug grin still painted over his lips as Tsukachi remains ever composed. He's on the defensive. Shota gruffs out his own comment. More like he's playing along with this. The chief calls for Shota's attention as Tsukachi asks another question, winding up Akatani more in his predicament. You can go home, Eraserhead. We have the dragon covered for now, woof. All that we will be doing until transport and logistics are arranged for his jail time is questioning and routine procedure. One of the officers can give you a ride home if you need one, woof. Usually, Shota would ignore the offer to go home early and go back out on his patrol route to arrest more criminals still out on the streets, even after the hours spent after the raid and the statements he had to give about the operation. It wouldn't matter about the sleep pulling down on his eyelids, or the exhaustion in his bones, or the injuries already wearing him down. But all he can think about is getting home to check on his family, to check on his husband, his son, his cats. There's a restlessness in his gut that fills him with uncertainty as he watches how Akatani absent-mindedly spins the wedding band on his finger, smile still sharp and eyes still grinning, looking more like a fox than any dragon Shota had read or seen pictured about before. But he squashes down the feeling for now, instead turning to the chief and dipping his head in acknowledgement as he exits the stale and cool air of the observation room. Like a ghost, he easily slips past the lively bullpen of officers rushing to and fro through the station, some leading away criminals to detention rooms and others leading victims or witnesses to quieter areas. The aroma of coffee and sweat dissipate as he breaches the fresh air outside the stone building, making his way quickly in the direction of home. With every step, his burns and cuts still sting and his bruises stretch uncomfortably under the wraps and butterfly stitches he'd received on scene. He sighs and keeps up his pace, ducking his head in the tattered remains of his capture weapon to hide his worried frown. Rain taps gently on the windows of their homey apartment. It had poured only a short time ago, stopping momentarily, before beginning to kick up once more. If Hizashi rested his head back on the couch cushions and closed his eyes, he'd be off to the land of dreams in moments, no doubt. Instead, he fights the urge to lay back and rest, choosing to raise his honey tea to his lips and blow on the steaming golden liquid. With a short sip, he sets the ceramic cup back down on the side table and runs his fingers through the wild black curls on his son's head, who sleeps deeply, clutching onto the present mic blanket he'd wrapped around himself. Only an hour after being moved into his own bed, Izuku tiredly shuffled out of his room and made his way back to the couch, sitting next to Hizashi as the blonde anxiously waited for Shota to return. Sometime between 5 minutes and half an hour ago, the kid had fallen back to sleep, his half-empty cup of honey tea left to grow cold on the coffee table. Now, instead of putting his son in his room to rest on a proper bed, he let him stay on the couch with him. Even without the need for the bandages, Izuku had still insisted on wrapping his hands, arms and neck in them, until all that was bare was his face. Without the heart to take away one of the boy's comforts, Hizashi had instead helped him so he wouldn't make the material too tight on his still tender skin. Recovery Girl had stopped by a few days ago and treated the last of Izuku's more serious injuries, telling them that any other healing should be done naturally from now on so the body knows how to react and kickstart the healing process on its own. When leading Recovery Girl back to the door, Hizashi remembers the youthful heroine's words. "That boy's eyes. You dears look after him now, you hear?" Hearing the telltale jingle of Coffee Bean, Hizashi beckons the fat tabby over to lay down by him, the cat flicking his tail and plopping himself flat against his feet. Sipping his tea, Hizashi lets himself have a moment to take in their home. From the pictures he'd insisted be hung up around the walls, to the coffee ring his husband had accidentally made in their coffee table, Hizashi knew these 4 walls weren't big enough anymore for their family. This small 2-bedroom apartment had been there since they graduated together in UA, when money was tight and they were getting by with the allowance his parents were sending out to him and Shota to eat. Even when they'd gotten financially on their feet, having some money to put into savings, every month, they were still good times. Sitting on the floor with instant ramen and a bottle of wine between them, trying to stitch themselves back together, slowly but surely after. Blinking out of the fog of memories he'd wandered into, Hizashi heard the lock turn as his husband returned to them. Some of the missing warmth in his chest was swept in with the way he sees the man he loves hang up his charred capture weapon and pause at the hallway, eyes meeting. "Welcome home, Sho." Tension bleeds out of both of them as they scan each other, Hizashi picking up the hidden bandages and injuries covering Shota. "I'm fine, Zashi." As always, it doesn't stop his concern from showing through, getting worse the closer his husband gets to him. As his sleep-deprived husband leans down, Hizashi can feel how he winces as he does so. "Be careful, Sho. Don't bend." Scraggly black hair meets his shoulder as Shota leans his head there for a moment. It was rare for his tired husband to show such vulnerability and affection, not that Hizashi thought the man he married loved him any less for not showing such intimacy to him. But Hizashi knew his husband well, had known him for years, enough to know that there must be something big weighing on his mind. "Come here." Shifting carefully, Hizashi manages to move their son enough for Shota to sit on the couch with them. With careful hands to guide his injured husband to be as comfortably seated as possible, Hizashi leans against the back of the couch with Shota settled on one side and their son deeply asleep on his other. With delicate fingers, he weaves them between his partners until they are locked loosely together. "You don't need to tell me," Hizashi assures his husband softly, keeping his voice quiet in case Izuku wakes up. From the way Shota's eyes fell onto their kid, worry swimming in those tired, black eyes, Hizashi knows it has something to do with the Hofukukai raid. Squeezing their hands lightly, Hizashi rests his head back on the cushions behind him. "We will keep him safe, Shota. Whatever happens, he's safe now. Remember? We can't change the past. We just have to make the future better." Ducking his head down, Hizashi still caught the way a small smile quirked the edges of his husband's mouth at the way he used Shota's own words of comfort against him. It still felt good to punch him a few times. Amusement filled his eyes at his husband's vehement streak, though he admired Shota's restraint. If he had been there instead, Izuku's father would have suffered a worse fate. Izuku got to try popcorn while you were out. Although he'd want to listen to the full fight and hear how his husband took down the dragon, he could pick up on how Shota winced as he slowly sunk into the couch, being mindful of his back and side. Flat black eyes full of exhaustion blinked at him. I thought we agreed not to give the kid sugar before his bedtime. Hisashi grinned lightly. You should have seen it show. As he told his husband how their son's whole face seemed to brighten at the taste of the popcorn, how fascinated he had been by the popping kernels and the fluffiness of the cooked corn. A small shuffle from Izuku turned their soft voices to gentle whispers as Hisashi felt his husband finally unwinding from the raid. He recounts Izuku's wonder at the Wisney films they had watched, the small questions about each character's possible quirks or powers. He notices the distant look fade in Shota's flat black eyes, the feather-light circles Shota had been rubbing into Hisashi's hand, easing into the occasional brush to show he's here and still awake. With a wide yawn, Hisashi tapers off of his plans to take Izuku to a Christmas market in the next few weeks, instead settling down to rest with his husband. He consciously avoids Shota's burns and bruises, not caring about the smell of smoke and the dirtiness and dampness of his husband's hero costume as they lay beside each other. Izuku rests his head on a pillow, propped up by the couch arm while his small feet push up against the pillow between the boy and Hisashi's leg. With one more glance to make sure the boy is safe and is still dreaming soundly, Hisashi finally allows the gentle rain and soft but deep breaths of his sleeping family to lull him to sleep. Towel drying his hair, Shota hides the grimace of pain he feels from how his bruises stretch across his back, the dark black and blue skin stark against his scars and pale complexion. With every step, his gray shirt brushes against his injuries, the worst of all being his burnt side. If the pain was uncomfortable for him at only first-degree burns, then he could only imagine how much pain the kid should have been in. Logically, he knew it was beyond concerning at the time, that Hisashi's reaction was how he felt at the time as well. But now, being on the receiving end of the same flames that hurt his son, he frowned. As he dropped the towel on the radiator to dry, he moved out of the master bedroom to where the sounds of Hisashi and their kid were sitting at the dining table. A ray of sunlight was shining in from the living room window, cutting through their apartment. It hit the wall just where he rounded the hallway corner. From the warm spot, he could spy Izuku trying to show Hisashi how to make an origami swan. With another piece of paper, Izuku pushed it towards the blonde and tore out a page for himself. The quick glance the freckled boy shot to him as he entered the kitchen made Shota realize how loud his footfalls were as he shuffled to his cupboard for a jelly pouch. Disapprovingly, Hisashi sent him a look but didn't say anything this time. Instead, he pressed down on the wing of his swan, trying to get the edge clean and flat before moving on to the next step. As always, Yowler had situated herself at the feet of her new favorite human, while Coffee Bean was held in Hisashi's lap. From the content purring escaping the grumpy fat tabby, his loud husband must have given in and overfed the glutton of a cat again. Sighing quietly at how Hisashi spoiled their cat and how much progress had been lost with the tabby's diet, Shota stalked over to the coffee pot and chugged down a cup. Morning show. Grunting in reply, he grabs the coffee pot and his cup again and downs a second serving of the steaming water in large gulps. After pouring yet another full cup of the stuff, he nurses it in his grip to savor before slurping his jelly pouch. Morning, Sho-san. Cup halting for a moment as he hears it, Shota lets his eyes rest on the kid. Today he was dressed in a black long-sleeved shirt, the one they had picked out with thumb loops in the sleeves. Over it, the kid had on a purple hoodie, the left arm having kanji written down reading, purple, and on the other arm in English, hoodie. Morning. Shota gruffs, ignoring how Hisashi whips his head to stare at him. Are you ready to meet Detective Tsukachi again, kid? As the kid ponders his answer, he observes how Izuku fiddles with the paper in his hands, worrying the edges between his digits before starting to create something from the blank page. Hisashi blinks out of his shock, shaking his head. The little helper here was telling me all about the detective's quirk. Nodding, Izuku adds. Zashi-san said my ideas were good, so I wanted to. Looking at Hisashi, the blonde encourages the boy to continue with a smile and shake of his head. I wanted to tell the detective about them. As a thank you. He'll be really happy to hear about your theories, kid. His loud husband exclaimed, finger guns pointing at the boy for a moment. I'm sure he'll appreciate the thank you, but also insist it is you he needs to thank, not the other way around. Shota adds. Although he knows he can't say more than this, not now, while the kid is still recovering from the past few years of trauma and loss he had been through. But the words rest on the tip of his tongue, ready to be said when the time comes. To tell the kid they are thankful for how he still kept a hold of his kindness and his faith in people, enough to trust again after his own flesh and blood had tried to destroy it in him. There was no doubt in Shota's mind that the boy's brilliance was the lasting legacy of Midoriya Izuku, the mother to this amazing kid. A woman that he would never be able to meet, but if he could, he would thank her for bringing up such a gentle boy. A light blush creeps up the boy's cheeks, before he tells Hisashi where he needs to score and fold next. Hastily, the blonde tries copying their son's origami skills while Shota takes another sip of his coffee to hide the smile on his face and focus his wandering thoughts. We can head out once I finish my coffee. Both agree as Hisashi reasons that Izuku can teach him how to origami until they leave, the boy placing his recently completed swan in the small bevy of perfect swans he had already created. Beside Hisashi, there were various crudely done swans, each getting more swan-like with the amount of practice he was doing on it. Seeing how Izuku folds the note paper into a perfect swan is intriguing. Shota can see the clear practice and skill the kid has in the way his bandaged fingers quickly flatten and bend the folds into shapes, forming the swan with a consciously slow step-by-step so Hisashi can follow his movements with more ease, as well as pointing out where his lively husband needed to place his overturned paper to get the right shaping. With his tongue sticking out in concentration, Hisashi finally created a decent-looking swan with their kid's guidance, his celebratory shout and jiggle getting a shadow of a smile from Izuku. Shota could see the smile in those red eyes of his, looking less shadowed now with the Damocles-like threat of his father in police custody. There was something still holding Izuku back, something Shota could understand and suspected would remain until the dragon was securely in Tartarus where he belonged for all of his crimes. But until the death of Midoriya Izuku could be proven to be a murder committed by Akitani Hisashi in the court of law, Shota knew it would remain a dark patch in his son's life. A door not yet closed. As Shota polishes off his coffee and washes the cup, he hears his husband's endless chatter come to a stop at a question. Hey Izuku, could I have one of your swans? Surprise enters those red eyes, before Izuku tilts his head and looks at his pile. Plucking out a particularly good origami swan, Izuku places it in Hisashi's hand. Here. Thanking the boy, Shota watches as the blonde zips excitedly into the living room, before leaning himself around the doorway to see them again, no swans in sight on his person. By now, Shota had dried his cleaned cup and put it beside the coffee machine for the next time, watching as the kid gathered his swans together on top of his notebook to be carried off to what Shota suspects will be the kid's room. Alright, time to go. Shota sees Izuku disappear down the hallway as he goes to change his indoor slippers with his boots, tying up the laces despite the way his body protests the movements as Hisashi wraps his old blue scarf around his neck and untucks his blonde hair. It had gotten caught in all the additional layers the voice hero had donned for their short walk, left down for ease, and what Shota knew would be a well-deserved rest of his husband's scalp from the amount of hair gel he uses to make it defy gravity while in costume. But as Shota scans the room, there the swans rest, nestled beside a photo frame of himself and his husband back in their UA days. Shooting a glance at Hisashi, he receives a warm smile that crescents those cherry-red eyes behind his husband's glasses. Appearing around the corner, Izuku now carries his puffy winter coat over his arm, Yowler following at his heels as he carries a different notebook in his hand. Shota hands the kid Hisashi's red scarf, making sure Izuku has his gloves with him before they head out. Quietly, while Hisashi tells Shota about some of the things that happened in his radio show that week, he hears their kid bid goodbye to Yowler and promise to be back soon. And he totally doesn't feel his heart melt a bit at that. He wasn't getting soft. Instead, he offers his hand for Izuku to take as Hisashi shepherds them out of their home and towards the elevators, recounting his tales of hosting his radio show to Izuku, while Shota flatly comments about some of his husband's blatant sensationalism. But the freckled boy seems to enjoy Hisashi's infectious enthusiasm and positivity, so he doesn't ruin the fun too much and only corrects the blonde when his tales become too fantastical and outlandish. As he lets Izuku push the ground-level elevator button for them, he can't stop himself from giving his kid a gentle hair ruffle. And from the way the kid leans into it, he supposes that logically he made the right choice this time. Coffee permeates the air as Shota follows Hisashi and their son to the counter, eyes falling onto the selection of food and drinks they offer, as well as some visuals of their more popular options. Like Hisashi, habitual paranoia itches at him as he scans over the other patrons and staff for weapons or suspicious behavior. His gut instinct that something was wrong had only gotten worse after returning home, his thoughts on changing the meeting point with Tsukachi to their secure apartment growing stronger. If not for the determined look in Hisashi's eyes and the perkiness of Izuku for the outing, he would have done so. Settled down in a corner booth at the back of the cafe, with sight lines over the majority of entry and exit points and a solid wall behind him, Shota spots Tsukachi enter through the entrance first. Hisashi is quick to catch Tsukachi next, then Izuku, who scribbles one last sentence in his notebook and snaps it shut. The kid had also been on high alert as well, eyes scanning over the others and his constant writing in his notebook. "Good morning everyone, sorry I'm a little late." "No problem at all, detective. Izuku has been really excited to see you again." Hisashi replies as the detective takes a seat with them, hat now held in his hand as he pulls up his briefcase. Reluctantly, Shota nudges over the extra coffee Hisashi ordered for Tsukachi, which the detective takes a generous sip of with a polite thank you once he knows it's for him. It is nice to see Izuku-kun again. Although clearly exhausted, dark smudges under his bloodshot brown eyes, Tsukachi smiles at the boy. "How has it been, Izuku-kun?" Shota has no doubt in his mind the detective had been at the station for the rest of the night and early morning, sorting through paperwork and trying to surmise how many of the Hafukukai had been captured and how many had gone underground. It was clear, from the list Izuku had produced for them and the sheer size of the compound, that there were many more members yet unaccounted for. At least, with the dragon captured, the Yakuza group would be losing one of their high-ranking members and suffering from a loss in power. There were still other Yakuza members of the Hafukukai that were dangerous, but for now, they would be laying low and trying to fill the power vacuum they had created. Sir Night Eye had already been working on dismantling the group, so operations were in place for future raids until they were dissolved and imprisoned. Izuku fidgets in his seat for a moment, fingers twisting in his long sleeves, before answering. "Zashi-san and Sho-san are really nice, detective." "I'm happy to hear that." Ever practical, Tsukachi opens his briefcase and takes out a folder. Both Shota and Hisashi know what the contents are and have kept quiet despite the questions the kid had asked them about their meeting. Part of Shota knew the boy would figure it out eventually, even if Hisashi wanted this to be a surprise. He is proven right by how Izuku looks at the new developments with calculated eyes, mind whirring. Raptly, he watches the folder get laid carefully on the table between them all, the inane sounds of the other customers buzzing as background noise to this moment. Bandaged fingers twitch, wanting to get hold of the file and learn what was inside, what could make it important enough for a detective to have locked away in a briefcase. Leaning over conspiratorially, Hisashi taps his finger beside Izuku's arm. "Hey Izuku, why don't you open up the folder for us?" Unsure, Izuku cautiously taps along the spine of his notebook, sweeping his gaze between him, his loud husband, and the detective. Shota feels something twist in his stomach at the implications it brings forth. How Izuku could have been treated, under his father's, no, the dragon's care. Shota had heard about the room Izuku had been kept in. A child's room. But there were no toys or soft touches inside it, only books and origami shapes. Hundreds of origami shapes. Lotuses. Scattered across the room, the paper flowers were the only unique feature in the barren and neat space, even the manila folders they'd ransacked from the desk looking more at home than those lotuses. Knowing a fraction of how Izuku's mind worked, his clear intelligence that went beyond the mind of the average 6-year-old, The logical conclusions he was coming to were that Akatani had been making the kid plot out some of their crimes. If that were the case, then presenting this file without explanation could. Swallowing down such thoughts, Shota reassured the boy. We wanted to make you officially Aizawa Izuku, kid. For a moment, Shota is given a glimpse of what Izuku was, a scared 6-year-old looking for help. Sho! Whines the voice hero, before Izuku's tense tapping stops in favor of cautiously picking up the folder. Taking a sip of his 5th coffee, he watches with veiled anticipation and pride as the kid opens the plain cover, eyes roaming over the contents with a fine scrutiny, as if the evidence of their relation were fake. Of course, with Tsukachi's help, the documentation was indeed real, as well as Shizenji's input to make sure his medical records were more than blank for any other medical professional to see. A myriad of emotions crossed their official son's eyes, face going a bit slack in shock from the way he analyzes the information before him. It took a few days for everything to be set up and registered, but all that is left can be done at your own pace. Tsukachi states, taking another careful gulp of coffee as Hizashi's leg bounces in nervousness. He can feel his loud husband's tapping foot against his own under the table, making him narrow his eyes at his jitteriness. Shota already felt on edge, not only from the raid but from his worries about if the kid was really okay with being with them or if he wanted to be somewhere else but was feeling pressured to stay. Old doubts kept popping up, so he tried hard to suppress those thoughts and focus on the now. I really am Aizawa Izuku now. Something in the boy's soft admission makes Shota relax as he gives him a smirk, Hizashi bursting out with his pent-up energy. That you are, Izuku. You're stuck with us. No take-backsies now, why dig? Suddenly, tears leak out of the kid's eyes, and Shota all but leaps out of his chair to make sure the boy is all right. Of course, he would deny this if anyone brought it up in future, but for now, he crouches by Izuku's side. A hesitant hand hovers over the boy's shoulder, a silent question which is answered by an equally soundless nod of acceptance. So he lets his hand drop onto Izuku's purple-clad shoulder and lightly squeezes it. Is everything all right, kid? Bandaged fingers reach up to wipe away the few tears that had leaked out, Hizashi's hands hovering around their son in aborted movements to reach out and reassure the 6-year-old. After a moment, he consoles the boy with pats to his arm. It is all the proof they need to know what they have right now is precious and given with tarnished hope and faith, Izuku's trust. Watery red eyes meet Shota's, his bottom lip in between his teeth before he nods. Really like being called that. Aizawa Izuku. Rubbing his thumb soothingly into Izuku's shoulder, Shota sees how reverently the kid cradles the folder to his chest, wrapped securely in his arms. As if he didn't hold on to it tight enough, it would disappear. Still worried, he remains beside the kid as Tsukachi clears his throat and stands up, a knowing smile on his face. I think you have everything covered, Aizawa-san, Yamada-san. As he places his hat back on, he tips the rim at Izuku. Take care now, Izuku-kun. Detective Tsukachi, wait. All heads turn to Izuku as he suddenly opens his notebook, a few tears tracking down his cheeks before he rubs them off with his sleeve. Still clutching the folder to his chest, he uses one hand to delicately tear a particular page out of his notebook. With a bit of hesitance, he holds it out for the detective to take hold of, his feet swinging as they dangle above the floor while Shota watches Izuku explain. I was thinking about your quirk, and I had some thoughts on it. Take this as a thank you, detective. Surprise fills Tsukachi's face as his gloved fingers grasp the corner of the paper and slowly pull away with it, Izuku letting his grip go as it slides away from his wrapped fingers. Tsukachi brings the paper up to eye level, brown eyes widening before he clears his throat once more. Thank you, Izuku-kun. That was very detailed. I will have a look and try out some of your suggestions. A bit of sweat trickles from the side of the man's forehead, something that makes Shota's brow quirk in intrigue before Tsukachi securely stores the paper in his trench coat. All right, now that you have Izuku-kun's documents, I will take my leave. Enjoy the time off, Eraser, Yamada-san. Bidding him a goodbye, Hizashi asks Izuku if he would like to go to the park or head back home to relax. Seeing the boy hesitate, Shota steps in. We don't mind doing what you would prefer, kid. As their son looks up to meet his eyes, Izuku suddenly freezes as he looks over his shoulder. It is in that moment his senses flare up in alarm, the searing feeling of eyes burning into him. Subtly turning, Shota tries to see what Izuku sees, only for his son to grip at the arm of his jumper. Can we go home? Something flips in his chest at hearing the freckled boy use that term with them. Concern still knots itself in Shota's stomach at the panic that edges along Izuku's shoulders and twitching fingers that guard the folder and his notebook firmly. Hisashi, of course, picks up on this just as quickly, eyes subtly scanning their surroundings for danger as his guard shoots up even higher. Sure we can champ, let's go home. Hisashi thanks the cafe staff, managing to keep up the facade that nothing was wrong. For a daylight hero, Shota knew that was part of their responsibilities. To reassure the citizens of Japan that heroes will protect them and that nothing is wrong when there is, in fact, something very wrong. Weaving through a path of tables and chairs with the lowest amount of threat, they head out into the street once more, Izuku tucked in between them. Cold air stings his face, buried as it is in his scarf while Izuku huddles into his side. Hisashi guards the left side of their son as the feeling of being watched seems to only get worse. If Shota knew who the culprit was, he had no doubt in his mind that this feeling of scrutiny was the result of a quirk and he could use his quirk to get rid of it. But with so many people in such a public place, hoping to escape feeling like a bacterium under a microscope, they merge back onto the street with the lunchtime crowds to blend in. Like bugs were crawling up his skin, Hisashi could feel a pair of eyes on the back of his head. They were burrowing down into his scalp, itching, biting at his flesh in a way that made him shiver. He had never felt so seen before, not outside of his costume. It was unsettling, a kind of terrifying feeling that he'd never felt before. Not even against the villains he'd fought on his patrols and cases. Even with the amount of detours they took, well-known paths in case reporters or fans were bold enough as to find out and follow his civilian identity or Shota's identity and relationship with him, that laser-focused watch still drilled into him. Eventually, the feeling did lessen, but not enough for them to enter their apartment building through anything other than the basement-level parking lot. It was only when going underground that he felt the gaze leave him, letting his tense shoulders drop down. Ushering Izuku into their home, Hisashi hears Shota check the security system installed in their apartment to make sure it was working correctly. His husband had already alerted Tsukachi of the developments, his rarely used phone buzzing with messages. Turning his attention back to the kid, there's a dread that cloaks him. It falls in waves off his being, so stark against the paleness of his face and cream bandages. "Hey Izuku, do you want to come and sit down on the couch for a bit?" Gently, he asks, seeing the boy blink a few times and actually look at him now, rather than through him. A faint yes. Zashi-san leaves the boy's lips as the blonde guides him through getting his shoes, scarf and coat off, hastily shedding his own outdoor layers to direct the dazed kid into the living room. Throughout their journey back, the 6-year-old had been like a doll, just following them down winding streets and drifting along with Shota's movements. They had both tried to get Izuku to talk, to not be so eerily silent, but any question or person they pointed out didn't make the boy even look up from the ground. If anything, their encouragement only made the boy collapse further into himself, retreating far into his own mind. Like always, Yowler and Coffee Bean perk up at the sight of them, the Arabian Mao rushing towards Izuku and rubbing her head against the kid's legs. Almost on autopilot, Izuku rubs Yowler's head, still clutching his notebook and folder to his chest. Coffee Bean tries to lead him to the food bowl, but for now, he settles their son in his favorite spot on the couch and leaves Shota with their kid while he moves into the kitchen, hoping to help Izuku come back to them. When he returns, a tray in hand with 2 honey teas and 1 extra black coffee, he sees how Shota kneels in front of Izuku and asks him questions. To many, his husband's poker face would be hard to read, the picture of a perfectly blank expression. Except, to him, someone who had taken the time to learn the tells of the tired man, he could see quite clearly how much Shota cared, even if he tried to hide it under logic and a disinterested mask. And that was omniscience. Furrowed brows mar Shota's usual visage as their kid confirms the statement. With a careful step over Yowler, Hisashi looks between the pair as he sets down the drinks on the coffee table. Mind bringing me up to speed? Both of their eyes dart to him as he settles himself on the lone armchair in the corner of their living room, mug of honey tea in hand as the sweet aroma settles some of his nerves. Compared to his husband, Hisashi knows that he will never share the same tight bond he can see forming between the pair. It would be a lie to say he was fully and completely okay with it, with being left out of that connection the two had. But he understood it. Understood them. Their quirks, their lives, their minds. They were similar, oh so similar, as if Izuku were the younger image of the underground hero. For good and for worse. Times like these were when Hisashi felt the distance between them and him, a distance even he couldn't shout over to have them see him. Did that make him lesser in Izuku's and Shota's eyes? Stamping down the thought, he adjusts his glasses and crosses one leg over the other. Shota exhales, turning to half face him and half face their kid. During the planning for the raid, a crucial detail was provided by Izuku, omniscience. They have a quirk that allows them to see anything within a 1 kilometer distance from themselves. Despite the warmth of the tea in his hands, a sudden cold chill ran down his spine. To think a villain had such a quirk. It clicks into place, how Izuku had known straight away that they were being watched, that no matter how much they tried to detour and change location, those eyes had remained, monitoring them. Why Shota, who never revealed the details of any of his cases to those not involved in it, was telling him. As he huddles closer to the mug in his hands, his gaze lands on Izuku's own red eyes. Barely, he stops himself from flinching. Because those eyes sink into a hole without end. In a blink, those eyes return to the dull red rubies they were before. Like the black lens of a camera finally blinking its shutters to capture and file away the moment. Shaking his head, he takes a quick sip of his drink. He chokes. Hacking, it scorches down his throat, a trail of fire searing down his esophagus. Punching his chest, he's able to compose himself enough to wave off any concern, Shota's hands falling back down, leaving a chasm between them and himself once more. Izuku gingerly reaches for the other cup of honey tea, clasping it in his covered hands. The kid's shoulders hunch in slightly, huddling into himself. At least, his mishap had lowered some of the tension that had hiked Izuku's shoulders up to his ears, their peaks dropping in, concaving into themselves like craters. Meowing, Yowler jumps up onto the couch beside the kid, pacing around for a moment and resting beside her favorite human. They were looking for me. My father sent them out. To take me back. It's at this moment that Hisashi sees the slight shaking of the honey tea in those small hands. How some of the liquid spills over the rim of the mug, splashing on the bandages and leaving darkened blotches. No longer can Hisashi see those bottomless eyes, their depths hidden by a curtain of messy black hair. Their kid. Their amazing, incredibly smart son was terrified. Despite the way it scolds, he's ignoring the spillage as his mug meets the surface of the tray once more, a pool leaking out around the base as he bridges the gap. Crouching next to Shota, he places his hand on the one his husband has resting on Izuku's knee and squeezes it gently. Izuku, please look at me. A slight tilt gets him a peep at that carefully blank face and spiraling stare. A glimpse over the end of the imploding curl the boy was forming. But Hisashi doesn't back down, not this time, not ever again. With every part of him, the warm hand of support on his shoulder and in his hand, he pulls his son back to them. You won't be going anywhere unless it's by your choice, okay? Me and Sho won't let anyone take you. Omniscience is father's most loyal subordinate, Zashi-san. They won't stop until they have me. Fingers flex under his grip. Then we'll stop them, kid. Shota's black eyes blaze with promise, poker face melted away to show how serious he was. Hisashi nods. As long as Sho and I are here, no one will ever take you away to that place again. They'll have to go through 2 pro heroes before they can even think of touching you. A flicker sparks in Izuku's dark eyes. Do you? The pause. The breath. Do you promise? I do, Izuku. I do. White teeth suddenly show themselves as the kid bites down on his bottom lip, composure cracking as Shota slips his hand out from under Hisashi's own hand and pulls the kid in to let out all the fear and panic coursing through his too small body. And if their son, who had begun to believe in them, felt safe enough to let the lid slip on his bottled emotions, then Hizashi would nurture and repair him while promising to beat down anyone who came to steal away their little star. So help him, Kami. A tense calm had befallen their home in the wake of what had been planned as a day of celebration. As Shota stretched and popped his shoulder, he looked over at the couch. Izuku had curled up, clearly exhausted from the events of the day, using Hizashi's lap as a headrest while the blonde went through the files they had on the Hofukukai. His notebook and the official documentation from Tsukachi had been placed on the kid's desk for him. In one hand, Hizashi flips over the photos and papers in each file, his other hand smoothing gently through their kid's hair. Occasionally, his virtuoso fingers would rise up and push his slipping glasses back up his bridge, red eyes focused on absorbing what had been printed and laid out for them. Shota, there's no mention here in the reports about Izuku. While his husband is tucking a wayward strand of blonde hair behind his ear, Shota dips his head. Tsukachi said he would be asking some of those captured about that. But the theory is that only the inner circle knew about Izuku's existence. Hizashi steepled his fingers, before dropping one again to run through their son's curls as Izuku shifts and stirs. After a few moments of his husband's careful ministrations, the boy settles back down again. Find that hard to believe, Sho. Holding up a sketch created to roughly show what the pro-hero schematics had seen of the underground compound, Hizashi taps a certain spot on the blueprint. See here? This is where you said Izuku's room was found. Trailing his finger down a pathway, the blonde circles the large cavern where weapons and supplies had been found and secured by the authorities. The entrance to the room comes from a direct pathway to their armory. It's unlikely that Izuku would go unseen. A tired sigh escapes his lips, before Shota scratches at his stubble and grabs his empty coffee mug. Here. Hand outstretched, Hizashi gives his empty mug over to Shota, who shuffles into the kitchen to start up another round of drinks. The motions are so familiar that he's convinced he could make coffee in his sleep, and probably had done so before. Memories of late nights studying in UA, of 2 early mornings where he'd struggled to stay awake, to afternoons dragged out to cafes. Strong and earthy, the aroma of the coffee grounded him as he ventured back into the living room. From the shuffles down the hallway and lack of his husband and son, Shota set the blonde's chipped mug down on the coffee table and eased himself back on the couch. Papers were scattered in an organized chaos, categories that he knows well from nights spent watching his husband help track down the occasional Quirk trafficking ring or illegal Quirk fighting rings. As he sunk back into the cushions, he took a sip of the piping hot coffee. His shoulders dropped down and he let himself rest his eyes for a few moments, before the near-silent pads of footsteps were heard. The couch dips as Hizashi joins him, legs curling up as he reties his messy bun. All right, I've put the lil guy to bed. Leaning forward, his long arms reach for the folder he'd been scouring, cherry red eyes sharp. It was one of the sides to his husband he loved most. The way the man could pick apart and analyze things, breaking information down in a way where it can be used against villains and criminals. As those eyes he loves slide to meet his own, he blinks and looks away, picking up a random file to make himself busy. Nights had been spent extensively remembering all that lay in these boxes of folders. So much so, Shota wouldn't be surprised if it was burned into his brain for the rest of his life. Time flies as Shota bounces ideas off Hizashi, reminding him of those times in UA where they were partnered up on tests and hero exercises. Hizashi offers angles Shota hadn't considered before, always thinking and planning a few steps ahead like they'd been taught to do, had learnt after. It's Tsukachi. Shooting a glance to his husband, Hizashi falls silent to listen in as Shota lifts up his buzzing phone. Answering the call, he's curt and to the point. The bounty out for Izuku just got cleared. Is he with you right now? Pausing, Shota straightens. That he's in his room. A barely heard sigh whispers over the connection, one Shota suspected Tsukachi had meant to make unheard. I thought for a moment that a throat clears. Apologies, I sent a copy of the data that Sir Night Eye was able to salvage from the Alcotech computer servers, though most of the data was wiped prior a hero halting the deletions. And omniscience? No sightings recorded. They must be working with someone else, or they changed into a disguise. We've put out a watch to all heroes to be on the lookout. Hisashi's face pinches in worry at the news, the tips of his mustache dipping with a slight frown on his lips as their eyes meet. Tsukachi, I'm putting you on speaker for Zashi. Placing the phone down on the coffee table, he takes a sip of coffee, grimacing slightly at the cold liquid. Ah, hello again, Yamada-san. Elbow lightly driven into his side, Shota winces and abandons his coffee to glare at his husband, who answers the detective in kind and turns to look down at his side. Suddenly, the dots connect and the lively man cringes, mouthing a sorry show. As Tsukachi continues, we have a few undercover cops patrolling around the neighborhood for you. All have been background checked and approved by the chief himself. Wariness is plain to see in Hisashi's eyes, who shuffles forward, plants his bare feet on the floor and places his elbows on his knees. And the bounty? Any ideas on who removed it? We're working on it. More noise is heard through the line as the detective muffles the mic on his end to briefly speak with someone, before focusing back on them. Looks like we can tell the culprit used different signal towers and routers to access the page and erase the bounty. Our experts are being run in circles. It's only from years of training that Shota hears it, shuffling. As he looks over to the sound, the blur of black that ducks back behind the hallway corner makes him arch a brow. Hisashi hums at the detective's words while Shota excuses himself for a moment, sights set on their kid as he rounds the corner and meets his wide-eyed stare. You should be sleeping, kid. Tearing his dark red eyes away, Izuku shuffles in place. But I can't. Squatting down before the boy, he ducks his head to catch Izuku's gaze once more. When their eyes meet again, Shota can see a glimpse of the feelings the kid tries to hide. But, be it the lack of sleep catching up to the kid, or the fact their son was beginning to open up to them, Shota can see how Izuku twists his hands into the front pouch of his purple hoodie. Go to bed, kid. I know you want to help, but dash. Shosen, please. Deep red eyes implore him, looking like flowers about to burst into bloom. All of this is because of me. I'm being selfish by being here, with you and Zashi-san. Something sharpens in those eyes, refining to a point that Shota sees glinting in the darkness found in them. I would like to help. Placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder, Shota meets that stare head-on. There isn't much he can do, not with how resourceful his son had proven to be in the short time he'd known the kid. If he was set on something, there was no stopping him. So, Shota makes a few decisions right there, knelt beside the 6-year. Okay. Black curls bounce with how fast Izuku's head snaps to meet his stare. But we will tell you if and when we get updates. And you are not selfish for wanting to be here, Izuku. Urging the kid to turn around, he leads him back to the kid's bedroom by the shoulder, where Yowler awaits. Let's get you into bed or the deal's off. The nightlight they'd gotten for the kid spread star-shaped yellow constellations across the walls, floor and ceiling, transforming the simple room into the child's very own planetarium. Shota follows the kid as he picks out his pajamas and carries them with him to the bathroom to change and brush his teeth. Shota, as he always does, offers to help if the kid wanted or needed him to, only for Izuku to do everything himself. Of course, Shota would check over and make sure the boy had brushed his teeth properly and that the bandages the 6-year-old wore were properly removed. Sho-san. Looking up from the seat he'd taken at the foot of Izuku's bed, Shota blinks at the kid. His nails pick slightly at the threads in the purple blanket spread across the comforter, Yowler purring softly as his own fingers scritch tenderly at the feline's chin. Claws knead at the blanket as she stretches out towards him, butting her head into his thigh as her paws flex and curl in bliss as he runs his hand down her stomach. Could you tell me about how you first got your chew quirk? Sure, kid. Resting his back against the foot of Izuku's bed, Shota drops his head back to stare up at the ceiling filled with stars, thinking back to the past. Even if the doors and rooms of memories he passes are ones he'd rather throw away the key for and never enter, he calmly floats through his memories for one he can use to bring comfort to the kid. Because, as much as it would be believable for the 6-year-old to be asking him for more information on his quirk, Shota knows what the kid's really looking for, a distraction. From nights spent wrapped up on the couch in their living room, choosing or scared against seeking help to sleep, Shota knew the signs of someone suffering from nightmares, after all. He'd lived through them. Another kid tried to use their quirk on me when mine activated for the first time. A small tilt sways the curls on the kid's head. What happened? Shota smirked. I punched him. As Shota recounted the memory and answered the kid's questions, the boy slowly began to relax. Yawns that were few and far between became frequent as sleepy eyes struggled to stay open. Only when he was sure Izuku's breaths were deep and even did he slowly stand from the spot he'd propped himself in, arms stretching above his head. Eyes scan over Izuku's freckled face which, despite the slight dark curve under his eyes, looked calm and serene as he slept. Spotting his husband leant against Izuku's door, he near-silently sweeps out of their son's room to join him, leaving the door open ajar as the occasional star cuts through and shines over the hallway's laminate. What did Tsukachi say? Settling back amongst the neatly stacked and filed boxes, the blonde stretches his legs out over Shota's lap as his husband rests his spine against the armrest. Their experts couldn't get a location from the person who removed the bounty, but they got a general area around the border to Yokohama. Yokohama. Shota frowned. Hizashi nodded. You know, the nation-state of Japan. Tsukachi is reaching out to his contacts there. It's out of our jurisdiction, in other words, the perfect place to hide away from heroes. It is. Hizashi agrees, his foot waving to an imaginary beat. But now that there's reason to suspect the Hafukukai are planning to travel to Yokohama, the police force can start beefing up their presence at the border between Japan and the nation-state. And we can focus on finding omniscience while we raise our kid. Speaking of, reaching over, Shota takes the folder Hizashi presents to him with ease. He reads only the first few lines then shuts the cover firmly. Quirk registration and primary schooling for. It's a bad idea for that right now, Zashi. A calloused hand rises up and tucks a loose lock of hair behind an ear, running down the long bang and dropping back down onto the pillow the blonde held in his lap. A fierce energy burns in those cherry-red eyes, determination and stubbornness in equal parts. Shota sighs. The kid is only just beginning to see his quirk as a quirk. And with omniscience still out there, it's not safe for Izuku to go to school. It's too soon. We can't keep Izuku locked up forever, Shota. Believe me, as much as I want to, at least, until any threats to our kid are locked up, Izuku should get the chance to have a normal childhood. His foot taps the folder in his hands. I did some research. As we're heroes, Izuku is eligible for some extra benefits and protection. I spoke with Tensei about the schools and he said his little bro is going to a private school. It's one where most legacy kids go if they're not homeschooled. It'll be a chance for Izuku to be around kids his own age, for him to make friends, find a routine. Trailing off, Shota catches Hizashi pause in counting off his fingers with every advantage he lists, meeting the troubled frown on Shota's own lips. What is it, Sho? Kids can be real brats when it comes to quirks. If there's any little quirkus running around, they'll latch onto the kid. A glint cuts across Hizashi's glasses as he grins. That's the best part. They have enforced anti-bullying policies. Plus, I think it'll be a fun family bonding activity to get our kids some self-defense moves, yeah. Huffing quietly, Shota acquiesced for now. I'll have a look through. But, no promises. Hell yeah. No promises, Hizashi. Sunlight creeps in through their curtains as he wakes up, earlier than usual. There's a chill in the air that thaws with the thermostat on high. Maybe it's the lingering sensation of being watched that rouses him every few hours, peppering him in goosebumps, the feeling of eyes watching him in his sleep. Shaking off those thoughts, Hizashi is quick to close the CHK in the curtains and head into the bathroom to shower and get ready for the day. Coffee Bean is already prowling in the kitchen for food, big eyes looking up at him as he bends down for the pair of cat bowls, stopping briefly to pet the tubby tabby. Purrs are returned to him as the feline winds his rotund body between Hizashi's legs, rubbing the side of his face against the cupboard door. Humming a tune, Hizashi starts up the coffee maker after appeasing their greedy cat, flicking on the kettle as he moves over to take stock of what they have in the fridge. There's a forced pep in his step as he pushes away the insistent urge to close the blinds in their kitchen window, block out any sightlines someone could use to watch them. Instead, he busies himself with grabbing the milk in the fridge door, along with the butter, before reaching into the back of another cupboard for flour. Zashinish, jumping, the blonde places a hand to his heart and clamps his mouth shut. Are you making pancakes? Clearing his throat, the blonde turns to the kid and nods. That I am champ. You want to help me out? A shy dip of the kid's head has Hisashi gesturing for Izuku to bring over a chair from the dining table and pour the bag of flour as they measure out their ingredients. There's still a little bit of hesitance to every move the kid makes, but compared to how it was when the 6-year-old had first followed Shota home, the cautiousness, watching everything like it would jump out and hurt him, Hisashi was proud of how much Izuku had begun to trust them. It could be seen in the way the kid let Hisashi close to him, in the way he let down his guard and let Hisashi pat his arm or Shota ruffle his hair. For only a few weeks of knowing the kid, it was a miracle. Quiet footsteps soon draw near to where the blonde had begun dancing around the kitchen, striking funny poses and moves to get that amused glimmer and ghost smile to form on the kid's face. If it helped distract them from the events of the day before, then who was he to ruin this reprieve? They turned on the radio at some point, the kid bobbing his head gently to the beat while watching as the voice hero played an air guitar or pulled off some impressively ridiculous dance moves. From the way the kid's shoulders slightly shook, it made Hisashi's smile just that bit more bright and a bit more real despite the paranoia eating away at his nerves. Mornin' show. He shoots his disheveled husband a grin. At least, the insomniac had managed to get some sleep and a shower. From the way Hisashi could smell the fresh scent of body wash coming from the shambling coffee addict. I was just telling our little helper here all about your special cat pancakes. Shota grunts in acknowledgement before he's downing half the pot of coffee. After being sufficiently caffeinated, the underground hero shuffles over to the stove. He ruffles the kid's hair lightly, which the kid tries to subtly lean into before Hisashi has the frying pan gently freed from his fingers. I'll take this. Go sit down, Zashi. Sweeping up his coffee mug, he pats his husband's hip, below where the burns are still healing this time, and settles in to watch the pair. Izuku is less shy with making direct skin contact with Shota. He notices, as Shota shows the kid how he makes the pancakes get shaped into a cat head, even gently guiding the kid in making one. Even if the kid isn't ready to smile yet, it's clear from his wide eyes and reactions that he's enjoying himself. And it's a refreshing change to how he'd been before, a firm step in the right direction. Zashi-san, look. Tilting his plate, their kid displays the vaguely cat-shaped pancake to Hisashi. Sho-san helped me make Yowler. And doesn't that just want to make him squeal? It's adorable. As if summoned by her name, their Arabian Mau meows in greeting while slinking under the dining table, no doubt stationing herself beside her favorite human. Contrary to popular belief, he has enough tact to restrict his reaction to a strangled noise in his throat. So all that comes out is, that looks real good, kid. You even added her whiskers. Hisashi keeps up the light atmosphere, even as breakfast winds to an end. From the long discussion they'd had before crashing, the two heroes had come to a decision on 3 schools for Izuku to attend, should he feel ready to. It may be drawing to the end of the school year, but at least he will be ready to join in the new term. A few months of tutoring for Izuku to catch up on what he's missed, if he needs it, which they both suspect he won't from how intelligent their kid is, and they can start to deliver on the promises they'd made. Catching the look Shota sends him, Hisashi drums his fingers on the table beside his empty plate. Dark red eyes flicker between him and Shota, their son beginning to fidget as he takes in the shift. How do you feel about school, Izuku? Those red eyes dart to the side as their kid fiddles with his fork, twirling it in his grip. He can't remember it much, but it was okay. There's a pause as the kid tilts his head, curly hair swaying with the movement. I liked learning though. It was fun. How would you feel about going to school again, kid? Shota asks, keeping his tone carefully disinterested. That I don't mind, Shosen, Zashi-san, why? Izuku picks at his now bandaged fingers. Is it okay to go back to school with omniscience and father's Yakuza? Hisashi hums. I was looking into it and there's a few schools out there funded and designed to keep the children of pro-heroes safe, should they choose to be educated publicly and not homeschooled. Pretty neat, right? Even with the less-than-desirable situation, that their son has to worry about being taken or, kami forbid, being hurt by the Yakuza, he wouldn't trade it for another reality where this situation was different. Because maybe they wouldn't have been able to ever meet their kid or be as close to him as they are now. Or, a quiet part of himself he'd been trying to snuff out whispers, they could have met the kid as a villain. But it's up to you, kid. We won't force you to go if you're not ready or would prefer homeschooling. Shota has that protective gleam in his eyes, Hisashi knows. When the kid looks back at him, the blonde nods in solidarity to his husband's words. Chewing his lip, Izuku takes in their words. You can have a think about it. Shota reminds their kid, who picks up his new red notebook and holds it to his chest. The year starts in April, so you have a few months to decide on what you want, kid. And we don't mind what you choose. Hisashi adds, smiling gently at the way those small shoulders relax once more. Any choice won't be a problem for us, okay, little guy? And you can always change your decision if you want to. Shota takes all of their plates to the sink to wash them as Izuku approaches him, a roll of bandages in his hands which he picks at nervously. Already, Hisashi had slipped on a pair of plastic gloves from the first aid box in the bathroom, now tucked in the pockets of any outfit he was wearing that day. It didn't matter about convenience or anything of the sort, but if it made their son, his little helper, comfortable, then he'd carry a pair anywhere he goes from now on. Holding his now gloved palm out wordlessly, the boy drops the medical material in his hand and holds his own hand out for Hisashi to start wrapping. Taking the scissors safely from his 6-year-old's hands, he keeps them with him while Izuku inspects how the bandages look, twisting and turning his hands for his eyes to survey as much as he can. Thank you, Zashi-san. Lightly, the blonde pats the boy's covered arm. No problem, Squirt. A few weeks pass and they're still no closer to finding omniscience. It frustrates him. Nights spent patrolling the city, checking in with Tsukachi and other underground heroes in the network, just to hear traces of a person fitting their description of the Yakuza member. What only makes the situation harder is the ice that is more often than not coating the buildings and streets, as well as making the temperature drop drastically. If people are out and about at night, they're so bundled up it's hard to get any facial details. Blearily, he'll wake in the late hours of the morning, his kid already huddled into his spot on the couch with black smudges under his eyes. There was nothing neither he nor his husband could say to reassure Izuku, something they all knew. Pushing his hair back, Shota sighs and looks over to where Izuku sits. Socked feet sticking out of the kotatsu, the kid has his favorite blanket pulled over his head and tucked in around him like some purple cocoon. On the tabletop, there's a maths book open, one Hisashi had checked out. Of the library for the 6-year-old, his All Might-themed pencil scratching across his plain green notebook, chewing his lip in concentration. Lounging beside him is their cream-colored cat and chubby tabby. Coffee Bean had recently warmed up to the kid, though Shota suspects that has more to do with the treats the kid had been sneaking the glutton of a feline than anything else. The pair of cats occasionally bat one another with their tails, some playful swipes or pushing in the mix, but settle down quickly enough that Shota isn't separating them. At least, his son will placate the pair with a pat every now and then between mad scribbling and page-turning. Suddenly, the sound of the door opening has Shota up and in front of the kid. Shota-kun. Recognizing the voice, he relaxes and then stalks into the hallway, ignoring how the kid's curious gaze follows him until he blocks the entryway to their unexpected guest. It's the click of her heels, the faint sweet scent she gives off and the use of her spare key to their apartment that really cements this for him as he's greeted with a smirk and fluttering hand wave. Surprise! Flatly he stares. I'm talking with Hisashi about changing the locks. Hey! She protests, no real fire in her words, even as she pulls off her heels and slips on her guest slippers. Come on, Shota. You know I just asked Hisashi for a new key, you grumpy old man. Is that any way to greet your dear old friend? Why are you here, Namuri? Shifting his stance, he sees her suddenly move a white bag out. Swinging the proffered bag she sings, drinks, before letting the bag hang back against her leg. Whereas her expressions up until now had been teasing and light, the face she now wears is much more genuine. It's been almost a month since I've met up with you or Hisashi. I was, well, Now at the mouth of the hallway, where Shota still stands vigil, she's just at the threshold of where the apartment opens up to the living area. Wario H my Kami, Shota. You have a kid. Pushing off the wall, he's too late to stop the woman from dropping the bag and rushing over to the kid. As she closes the gap in seconds, too quick and abrupt, Izuku flinches violently but stays stock still as if. Namuri dash. You are just the cutest little thing I have ever seen. Gushing, she only stops from trying to fold her arms around Izuku as she takes in how stiff he is. How wide his eyes are, staring at her, through her. Placing himself between his son and his friend, he glares at her. As their eyes meet, she has enough shame to look away first. Huffing out a tired breath, he places his hand on the 6-year-old's head. This is Izuku. Izuku, meet Kayama Namuri. A small hand clutches the side of his sweatpants for a moment, before letting go. Namuri, for her part, crouches down to Izuku's level with deliberately slow movements and sets some space between them. Hi Izuku-kun. Sorry if I scared you, I was just really excited to meet you. I promise. I won't do that again. That's okay, Midnight-san. Raised eyebrows, the heroine shoots Shota a look which he smirks at. Alright if you say so, sweetie. Did your dads tell you about little old me? Fidgeting, the boy shakes his head. I could tell from your hair and how you know Sho-san and Zashi-san. You also have a calm sedate smell and I saw how you kept your hand positioned at your hip over where you keep your whip. Sky blue eyes blow wide and stay on Izuku as she compliments the kid. It means Shota can relax for the moment as the kid loosens up and asks the woman about her quirk. Clearly, it eases the boy into some modicum of comfort and safety, a level of calm falling over the apartment. While Izuku shuffles down the hallway, Namuri rounds on Shota. Shota, how in the hell do you have a kid? The official story is that Izuku was brought up by his mother and her partner before coming to live with us after his mother died and her partner was deemed unfit to look after the kid. Settling down on the couch, Namuri gestures for him to elaborate. Izuku is the son of a yakuza in the Hafukakai and can erase quirks by skin-to-skin contact. Sking in a sharp breath, the woman folds her hands in her lap. That's not what I was expecting. Are you sure you're not the boy's father? She kicks off her slippers and tucks her legs under herself, propping up an elbow on the arm of the couch. He must only be about, 8? He's 6 years old. And yes, it's illogical to think that I could be his biological father, Namuri. Astonished, Namuri blinks a few times at him, staring. Eventually, she says something. It's as if an epiphany has struck her as a cunning little smile curves her lips, glasses sliding down slightly as she purrs. Oh, now I have a little munchkin to call me Auntie Nemi. Blankly, Shota stares at her until she changes her coy facade into something more genuine, less like her hero persona. She reaches over the space between them and pats his arm, tilting her head as she looks at him. About time, you grumpy old man. Hearing the shuffling footsteps of his son returning, he lowers his voice. You noticed already, so I don't need to spell it out for you. Kid's afraid of touching or being touched by people unless he trusts them. Humming, the woman instead kicks out at Shota. Alright, go get me a drink or something, you hobo. I'm still a guest, you know. Uninvited guest. Shota grumbles, but decides to follow the path of least resistance this time and moves into the kitchen with the white plastic carrier in tow. If he makes sure to keep an ear out for how the heroine interacts with his son, then he's just being cautious, not overprotective. If there was one thing Shota wanted right now, it was to go home, check on his family and sleep. That may have been 3 things, but if he chose one, the other 2 would follow after. Instead, he finds himself entering Tsukachi's office, just off the back of another freezing cold patrol full of the occasional drag dealer or mugger meeting the other end of his red glare and capture weapon. The heat of the police station had done wonders to thaw out his numb fingers, which he used right now to close the door of the office behind him. What do you have for me, Tsukachi? The detective roughly rubs at his red and black smudged eyes, a few days' stubble beginning to collect on his jaw from constantly working, no doubt. Chief says that unless we catch a positive sighting of omniscience, he's pulling resources from the case. Shota frowns, crossing his arms over his chest from where he leans against the wall. He'd been in this office enough times to know how much the small space acted like the detective's primary home. A few bland awards and an old leather couch were shoved into the corner, while his desk dominated the space. From personal experience, Shota could attest that the couch had seen and been in better days. His back twinged in pain at just the memory the couch invoked. We know that the rest of the Hafukukai will be in Yokohama. The only reason Omniscience is even here is to take Izuku. A heavy sigh falls from the man's lips as he loosens his tie, the stiff material making way to show a coffee-stained cuff. The main reason is this: Akatani Hisashi, the dragon, will be going on trial in the next few days. The chief wants full security centered on that trial. For a moment, Shota closes his eyes, hoping it was just the sleep deprivation catching up and making him hear things. But as he half opens his tired eyes and stares at the equally exhausted detective, he can see just how disbelieving the law enforcer is over the situation. Akatani's lawyer managed to get the criminal court to agree for a trial on this, even if the evidence and case is cut and dry. Shota purses his lips, before breathing out a silent huff. Leverage. Akatani must have used the moles in the police force as a bargaining chip to get this trial through. Tsukachi dragged a hand down his face. That would do it. As the other took a quick sip from the old police academy coffee mug the detective still owned, Shota felt his phone buzz. Ever since he'd brought his son home, the phone had now become a means to check the kid was okay. Before, the device was hardly used, stowed into a pouch on his utility belt he hardly touched. As his fingers twitched to check his family were safe, he shifted on his feet. I thought it'd be best if you heard about the trial from me in any case. Especially as it seems the chief wants you to provide a statement. Tsukachi rounded off, giving the underground hero a tired and strained smile. Nodding once, Shota pushes himself up straight. He'd worked enough times with the detective over the years to tell when their conversation was over and when they were merely taking a small break before going back to their sleepless and work-filled schedules. And happy late New Year's, Eraser. Pass on the well wishes. To Yamada-san and Izuku-kun, please. As soon as he leaves the office, Shota pulls out his phone and checks it. Zashi. A breath escapes him as he sees the picture his husband has sent. Prescription glasses rests askew on the blonde man's face, hair a mess as flour covers him and their kid. But the mince pies that rest on the counter are evidence enough of what the pair had been up to. And from the way Coffee Bean contentedly licks away at his fur and watches them, the chubby feline had been given some of the seasonal-themed treats they'd picked up at the store. It's a long and bitingly cold march back to the apartment, Shota's breaths escaping in white clouds as he tucks his hands deep into the pockets of his costume. But the promise of warmth at home keeps a fire burning in his chest. A trial, one the dragon would clearly lose, was either a last-ditch attempt to lessen the criminal's sentence or a way to be remembered. Whatever it was, the feeling in his gut tightened. It had to be some plan formed by the Yakuza to throw them off. The timing, the fact the chief wanted to lessen resources in an active investigation to ensure the dragon was justly serving his sentence in court. The key slides home in the front door's lock. The Christmas wreath Hisashi's parents had given them still hanging up outside their abode as he crosses the threshold. Even with Christmas and New Year's now over, Hisashi had insisted on letting them remain up for at least another week. So, as Shota usually does, he'd let the blonde keep them up. He quietly slides out of his boots and places them to the side, feet quickly slipping into his house slippers when a curly head of black hair appears in the entry. No, Shota's heart does not melt at the way his son makes sure to greet him. It does not cause his eyes to soften as the kid shuffles on his feet, wearing the pajama set Kiyama had bought the kid for Christmas. What it does do is make him reach his hand forward to lightly ruffle the boy's unruly mop of hair, even if the hood of his pajama top covers the black strands up. You should be in bed, kid. Zashi-san said I could stay up later, tonight. Hearing the voice hero call out his usual welcome home greeting to him from the direction of the bedroom hallway, Shota slinks into the festively decorated living area. Their decorated Christmas tree rests in the corner, bringing up memories of helping Izuku put on the old assortment of ornaments and trying to detangle the miles-long amount of Christmas tree lights they'd had carefully stored away in the bottom of the hallway closet. Whatever remains of their Christmas and New Year's haul of treats dwindles by the day, the most recent casualties left in the colorful wrappers and crumbs scattering the plates the pair had left on the coffee table. Shota stacks the pair of plates and swiftly carries them into the kitchen, gesturing for their kid to follow. "How was your day with Nemuri?" "Auntie Nemi took me to the park, then we came back and I got to finish off Zashi-san's test." Clearly, Shota's hunch had been right about the boy. He was incredibly intelligent for his age. By now, neither him nor his husband had any doubt Izuku would be behind in terms of academics compared to other kids, not that they'd had doubts to begin with. Through some breakthrough, their friend had also seemed to say something that resonated with their kid, something that had begun to take root in their nightly routine. As Izuku quietly summarized the things he'd done and learnt that day, a routine his other half had started with their son to make him feel comfortable, Shota quietly hummed in all the right places and continued to wash up and set the cleaned plates to dry on the drying rack. Quickly, Shota slurps dry a jelly pouch while he sets up the coffee maker and kettle for the morning. It's a common nightly cycle that helps him unwind from his patrol, a way to switch off and relax. His burnt side had finally healed up, only some light discoloration remaining where the center of the affected area had been. A reminder. Wiping down the counter, Shota sets the cloth to dry and sweeps through the apartment to make sure all the locks are locked and lights are off. Izuku falls quiet as they hear Hizashi in the master bedroom, shuffling around. Shota looks at their kid for a moment, getting a firm nod in response to the unasked question. Even if Izuku's hands begin to wring the ends of his pajama top in nervousness. "I'm putting the kid to bed, Zashi." "Okay." Hizashi's voice is muffled through the wooden door, but easy to make out. "I'll join you soon." With Izuku now tucked in his bed, they both turn as the blonde enters the room. A fragrance of fresh soap and mint wafts through and diffuses in the air, a scent Shota knows well. It had been the same brand and smell his husband had been using since their UA days. By now, he'd be remiss to mistake that specific brand and body wash for anything other than just Hizashi. The bright blonde hair hangs down, still wet from the recent shower the other must have had after his radio segment and patrol. He'd changed into an old and faded rock band shirt and some ratty sweats for the evening, his glasses resting low on the bridge of his nose to relieve the red marks at the bridge. "Alright, my lil' champ. Let's rock this." Carefully, Hizashi offers his bare hand before Izuku, who hesitates for a moment to reach out. Clear conflict warred in his eyes as he lifted his small hand, bare fingers inching closer to the relaxed open palm of his husband's own larger hand. I want to try using my Quirk on you, Zashi-san. If that's okay." Blinking, Shota remembers looking through the kitchen doorway to peer at the pair. From where the two were standing, he couldn't see more than the back of Izuku's profile, but he could see the front of the voice hero. The way his other half had lit up at the request, catching himself before he could squawk and force Shota to use his quirk for the safety of their eardrums and any more noise complaints from their neighbors, made a small smile twitch at his lips. A slight brush of Izuku's fingertips ghosted Hizashi's palm, the contact springing forth a breathtaking illumination of blue as the quirk activated. It overtook the projected star constellations, a pattern vaguely like scripted writing filling the space before fading away. In that time, Izuku had jerked his hand back, as if scalded, from Hizashi. A tiny frown tugged down the 6-year-old's mouth as he bit his bottom lip in frustration. "It's okay, kid. This is the first time you've used your quirk on Zashi." "Yeah." His husband is quick to encourage, pulling his arm back easily to rest it in his lap. "And it didn't hurt me or anything." Hizashi's hands twitched in a familiar movement Shota knew to mean the blonde was aborting attempts to rub at his throat. It was a familiar tell, one born from the times Shota had used his own quirk on the other man. Izuku tracked the movement as well before ducking his head and picking at the stitching of his blanket. Sharing a brief look with his husband, Shota let Hizashi take the lead. "Hey," in a quieter voice, Hizashi slowly moved his hand into their kid's field of vision and at the comforter. When Izuku looked up once more, his husband continued. "I promised I'd tell ya if you'd hurt me. You haven't, C-. Glaring, he keeps his quirk active until the blonde holds up his hands in surrender. Closing his own eyes, he keeps them covered as his eyeballs itch for a few moments. Be it a combination of overusing his quirk, long-term damage beginning to set in, just general fatigue, Shota let the minor inconvenience fade away on its own for now. What he means to say, kid, is that he's used to having his quirk erased. I've done it plenty enough over the years. But what if dash? That won't happen. Shota meets those wide and anxious set of dark red eyes firmly but equally as reassuring in nature. After all, they'd had a similar discussion before. If at any point you feel overwhelmed, or scared, or out of control, I can step in. Remember, quirks are merely tools. Like all tools we learn to master them as we grow up. Izuku finishes off, before a light redness covers his cheeks. He's quick to duck his head down as Hisashi shoots Shota a surprised stare, filled with awe and shock in equal measure. A quick shake of Hisashi's head sends a few golden locks of hair flying, but once his husband has stopped his short burst of movement, the look has dropped from his face. How about we call it a night for now? Easily, both Shota and their kid agree to Hisashi's proposal, making sure the kid is comfortable before they leave the room. As they venture to their own shared space, Hisashi is quick to whisper-yell his excitement. Sho? He did it. He used his quirk on me. Yes, Zashi, I was there. Sleep calls to him like an oasis calls to a man dying of thirst in the desert. With the assurance of the safety of his family, the warmth of their home, and the usual exhaustion his patrols leave him with, he fights the desire to fall back and give in to the heaviness of his eyes as Hisashi's energy sparks the blonde to pace the width of their bedroom. That felt like how your quirk works. Like, it feels like my quirk just vanished. Like, poof. Humming, Shota slowly blinks as his husband continues to whisper-mutter his thoughts loud enough for Shota to hear and understand. After a few more minutes, Hisashi slows down in his pacing and murmurs to face the dark-haired man. Are you sure you aren't Dash? Flatly, he cuts Hisashi off. Don't be illogical, Zashi. A heavy exhale leaves the blonde's lips as he falls back onto their bed. For a moment, a comfortable silence surrounds them, making Shota think his exuberant and energetic husband had fallen asleep. That I hope we can show Izuku that his quirk is just as amazing and incredible as he makes others feel about their own quirks, soon. Reaching to his left, Shota pats his husband's knee. We will. One step at a time. Hey everyone. Sorry for any updates you have been seeing. Long story short, the server I used to be a part of no longer exists. I am no longer a part of that server. I realized I had invites to it in this FIC and didn't want people to follow it and find out I am not in the server anymore after joining, if their intention was to talk with me. I will take the opportunity to give a bit of an announcement about this work. I still intend to finish this work. It will be on hiatus until September 9th. This is a combination of IRL things going on right now but mainly burnout for this FIC. Another thing I would like to give a heads up on. I will be rewriting this work once it is finished. So, if you have any feedback, please feel free to provide this in the comments if it is constructive and diplomatic. I would really appreciate it as I don't have a beta reader for anything I do and for the most part, I just write and post things straight away as I have no patience and understand the desire for content as a reader myself. Sorry to disappoint if you thought this was an update, but I was aware I needed to remove those previous links and didn't want people to feel I had abandoned this work. From now on, I have a link in my profile to the server I am currently in. If you would like to contact me and talk, you can do so through that server link. It's a small but chill server for writers and beta readers to help each other out and is owned by my friend, Chris's, who is a great writer. Again, I am really conscious I haven't updated in a while and people have probably lost interest in this work, but I will be returning to it in September. Stay safe out there. Shroom.